Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel for a very long overdue Nancy Drew video, because we are here to finally go over the results of my Nancy Drew music survey that I put out in the month of July and had everyone vote on their favorite tracks from each of the Nancy Drew game soundtracks and just make whatever general comments they wanted to about the soundtracks, and have had that survey completed for a while, but then just through several unexpected delays just had to keep putting it off, and finally got all the data collected and put into a presentation that we are going to go over in this video. And I was just so excited looking through and seeing the kind of comments that people made, and some results turned out exactly the way I was expecting, and some others were extremely surprising to me. And also I just felt like I learned some things I hadn't really thought about in terms of some of the soundtracks. So this was extremely enjoyable for my little Ravenclaw heart to collect all this data and go over it. And I hope that you will enjoy as we go through each of the soundtracks and talk about which track came out on top, and then just some other comments that maybe people made about runner-up tracks and just things in general about the soundtracks. So in terms of how this is going to work, I'm just going to go through the games in order, and the way I've set the presentation up is there is one slide that says whatever track was the favorite, and I do just want to clarify in terms of what do we mean by favorite. This doesn't mean that the track necessarily got at least 50% of the vote, 51% of the vote. For the most part, no track was able to be that popular among voters, so there's a lot of lower percentages in terms of what's the favorite. But I just decided, okay, whichever one comes out on top, whether it's a big difference or a little difference, we're going to put that one in the results as being the favorite, and then talk about comments that people said about that track specifically and what they really like about it. And then I do have another slide just to show off the pie chart of results. And what I did was I just listed the top 5 results, and what you're going to see on some of these is it was a very close vote. I think in one case there was at least one soundtrack where it was only 1 vote difference between first and second place winner. And we'll just go through it that way. And if you get to a soundtrack and you don't see your favorite track on the graph anywhere, and you're just super curious, like where did my favorite end up in the ranking, you can feel free to leave a comment below, and I will go into the results and I will let you know how well your track did. And I just want to say a big thank you to everyone who participated in this, and I thank you for the support. I've heard from more than one person who has just been eagerly awaiting this results video to finally come out. So here it is, and I hope that it was everything that you were hoping and dreaming for. So let's go ahead and dive in, obviously starting with Secrets Can Kill. So which track came out on top? Let me show you. So for Secrets Can Kill, we have Ant House coming out on top with 28.3% of the vote. And here are some of the things that people had to say about this track. So kind of the number one comment about this, I had several comments about this track is extremely nostalgic. Keep that word in mind. It's going to come up with this soundtrack. So you find so much nostalgia in this track that plays in Aunt Eloise's house. And then comments like, It's so peaceful, perfect background music. I liked the way this one commenter described it, of despite the chaos of the case, this song is peaceful. Someone pointing out that it truly elicits that classic Nancy Drew mystery sound. And another along those lines, again, we're talking classic Nancy Drew sound. Whatever that is to these people, this track is that for them. This person said, I can immediately recognize it from a few notes. It's so nostalgic and perfect. And then let's take a look at our overall results for Secrets Can Kill. So after Ant House, you have Mystery Light with 16% of the vote. And then actually the next highest result was Don't Know This Soundtrack. And that honestly didn't surprise me, because I know there's quite a few people who have never played this game because they can't get it to run on their computer in terms of the original one, and maybe just for whatever reason they haven't played the remastered version, which has the same soundtrack. And then after that, 11.3% of the vote is what's technically an unused track, but it definitely has a reputation in the fandom as being iconic, and anyone who has watched Arglefump videos over the years, you know a thing or two about the Nancy Drew rap with lyrics. When the game ends, we get to hear the version with no lyrics, but there is an unused version that has lyrics. And then with 9.4% of the vote, we have the 50s Diner track. And I just pulled out a few comments on Mystery Light, since that was our runner-up winner. One commenter talked about how they love how eerie the track is, and they think that the eerie feeling is hard to come by in the series music. Like, they think that things tend to either sound scary or not scary, but they like that to them this one actually sounds eerie. And someone also said that felt like very classic Nancy Drew to them. And on the Nancy Drew rap, someone said it really slaps, someone said it's iconic, and then there was one person who says that they have not played either version of Secrets Can Kill, but they do know the rap and they are completely obsessed with it. And then in terms of Secrets Can Kill, the soundtrack overall, again, probably the most common comment about this soundtrack was how nostalgic and iconic it is. And I'm hoping down the road to talk about these soundtracks in more detail. But if we're being honest, like, musically, Secrets Can Kill, it's certainly not the best one that Kevin Manthey ever did. But it just makes so much sense to me that people really have a lot of nostalgia for the first soundtrack in the series, and they just feel that it's iconic because of how significant it is. And then interesting comment from one person was that they said the music in this game reminds them of Scream in some ways, and they really love that. And then just another interesting observation that I made with this soundtrack was some people said they think this is a good soundtrack for a game that they don't think is particularly great. And then there was at least one person who really just doesn't like the Secrets Can Kill soundtrack at all. So those are kind of the standout things with Secrets Can Kill. So now let's move on to Stay Tuned for Danger. And let's see what our number one track for Stay Tuned for Danger is. And for that one, we have Maddie Day getting 33.3% of the vote. And for this track, we have someone who said that they think this is such an iconic song. It's consistently in their head when studying and when they're dreaming. We had some people talk about how calming this track is. And again, you're seeing this idea of having good memories and nostalgia associated with this track. And I loved this comment because it was a very music-driven comment. This person who says, I chose Maddie Day because it's so complex. In less than 2 minutes, the tone switches from lighter to pensive to troubling. I thought that was such an insightful remark about this particular track. And then we had some people who commented specifically on how much they loved the instrumentation of this track. And someone who knows your percussion instruments better than I do, I think it's a vibraphone, but if that's wrong, you can please correct me in the comments. And then we will take a look at our other favorites for this one. So after Maddie Day, with 22.9% of the vote, we have Lobby Day coming in second. And then again, 14.3% of the people saying they don't know the soundtrack. And again, that makes total sense to me because Stay Tuned for Danger, Her Interactive stopped selling it on their store for I think at least a couple years until they figured out there actually is a way to install and still play the game. And this is the second oldest Nancy Drew game. So again, there's just a lot of people that they just haven't even had a chance to play this game. So it makes sense that they wouldn't know the soundtrack. So then after that, we have STFD with 11.4% of the vote, and then Exit Day with 8.6% of the vote. And I just personally found it interesting that we have 3 what are labeled daytime tracks making the top 5. And then let's go back to Lobby, because I know that's a very familiar track in my opinion. I feel like I've heard it a lot in Her Interactive's marketing over the years. So in terms of what people had to say about that one person said that Lobby Day really defines the track and the game. They said if that track came up randomly, they would immediately know it. Someone said that one gets stuck in their head a lot. And then one person, again, talking about like how memorable it is, someone said that Stay Tuned for Danger, like as a whole, they don't find the music memorable, but that is the one track. If they heard Lobby Day, they would say, oh yeah, that one's definitely from Stay Tuned for Danger. And then some general comments about the soundtrack. Lots and lots of you love this soundtrack, again, because like Secrets Can Kill, it is really nostalgic. I had a few people say that it was either the first or one of the first games that they ever played. And lots of praise for this soundtrack because people think it really fits its location and that it nails the New York vibes, and that each of the individual tracks, in terms of based on what their title is, they just feel appropriate for where they're supposed to show up in game. And my personal favorite comment about this soundtrack was someone who said, another soundtrack that just oozes. I was made for this game and this game only. I just loved that comment, and keep that in mind. That in terms of soundtracks embodying their location, we're gonna see that as a running theme in these results in terms of how people respond to these soundtracks and how much they enjoy them or not. And did have I tried to like split so that I had like a section for the more positive comments, and then if people had more negative comments, I had another section for that. So there really wasn't much criticism for this soundtrack, other than there was that one person who said that they didn't think the music was very memorable to them personally. But there also was someone who they think that Stay Tuned for Danger soundtrack is overrated and sounds too much like elevator music. I'm not sure if they really were thinking like all of the music sounds like elevator music, or if they really were just focused specifically on Lobby and how much that is. But anyway, just a comment that they felt this one is overrated. So that's Stay Tuned for Danger, and now we shall move on and see what do we have for Message in a Haunted Mansion. So our favorite track for this game is Entry with 29.5% of the vote. And before I look more specifically, or actually no. Well, okay, we'll save my general comment for after. So, what do people have to say specifically about entry? You'll see this top comment up here, like this came up a lot. The quintessential Message in a Haunted Mansion track. And when I say the word quintessential, like I mean genuinely, like more than one person used the word quintessential, which as a word nerd, I just delighted in. Like, what are the odds that more than one person would use that beautiful vocabulary word to describe this track? But that's what they say. And saying like this track in particular is iconic. It feels the most like Message in a Haunted Mansion and just encapsulates the game. Then we have this person who decided, kind of in terms of how they were choosing favorites, I think I'm going to be choosing the track that I can immediately off the top of my head hum the melody to if you asked me to name a track from a specific game. So when they think Message in a Haunted Mansion, you tell them, start humming me something. Apparently their mind goes to entry, and so that's why they went with it. So you have that memorability factor, which I think again ties into how many people saying like this track, like this is Message in a Haunted Mansion's track. Someone who said that the music is mysterious but not scary, so they think it's perfect snooping music. Again, I loved it whenever people would make comments specifically about the music itself and how they think it works. This person saying the little bridge with the higher piano notes is just chef's kiss. And this bottom track, again, I also love it like when people kind of hear the story, they hear a story in the track. So this was such a cool comment to me of this person saying, I love the calm before the storm feeling this track gives. Like you are always looking over your shoulder to make sure you aren't being watched. So that was a really neat comment. And looking at our favorites past that. So after entry, we have Abby with 21% of the vote. And what people said about Abby, someone said it's like aquarium music, which they think is a vibe. And they said that Abby is the only track that makes them feel safe in this game. Again, I think that's a very insightful comment about Message in a Haunted Mansion soundtrack and how it works. Because there really aren't too many tracks in this game that give you relief from the spookiness. And someone else said, even though I was always so scared to get caught snooping as a kid, this track washes over me every time with a sense of calm and an almost whimsical melancholy. So again, someone really latching on to kind of the peaceful sense that Abby gives off. And then someone said, I love the spacey, maybe spiritual feel to it. And then our third place track, we have Chinese with 14.3% of the vote. And then Parlor and Dining coming in with a tie, both getting 8.6% of the vote. So what do people have to say about Message in a Haunted Mansion overall as a soundtrack? I noticed lots and lots of praise for how the tracks in this game immediately transport the player to like that specific location. So again, Abby. People hear it, they immediately put themselves in Abby's room. Chinese plays, they're immediately in Nancy's room. The saloon seance track plays, they are immediately downstairs in the basement. So they really they like how much they can hear the music, boom, they know exactly where they are in the game. However, I will say there was someone who actually, they didn't like how much Message in a Haunted Mansion is tied to specific locations. They actually found this soundtrack overrated because of that, and they don't like that when you're moving around in the game, the track would change to something else, which I found a very interesting comment just in terms of where we're at in the series right now, because maybe it's that things move in cycles, because kind of where we're at now with the modern era of Nancy Drew, in the Ryan Ricks era, we have actually moved back to that specific sense of like, you are in a location, this is the music you are going to hear and nothing else, and things change as you move around. So it's just interesting how that aspect has developed. Again, something I can hopefully dive into more at another time. Lots of praise for the piano in the Message in a Haunted Mansion soundtrack, and people praising it for just being a great soundtrack overall, and they feel like all the tracks just have a very unified sense. And one thing I wanted to mention was I had quite a few people say that they had a hard time picking a favorite for this game, just because they felt like there are so many great tracks for Message in a Haunted Mansion. So I think that ties right into this sense of everything feels united. So it makes it really difficult to say like, oh yeah, that's the standout track, and I love that one more than anything else. And then kind of on the other side, there were some people who said that they don't enjoy this soundtrack, not because they think it's poorly written, but just because they find a lot of it like too creepy or too scary, and they recognize that that's an integral part of making the game feel scary, and they appreciate it, but it just means like they have a really hard time listening to the soundtrack and actually enjoying it. So it's kind of one of those, the way I would describe it is like, I don't like this, but I respect it, because they do recognize what it's doing for the game. So that's Message in a Haunted Mansion. And now let's move on to what is one of the most beloved games in the fandom, Treasure in the Royal Tower. And our number one track for this one was Somber, with 29.5% of the vote. And again, let me just say from the get-go on this one, lots of people saying they had a really hard time picking a favorite. But there were some. Somber was one of them, and one other track, which you'll see in a little bit, that kind of consistently, like if we're narrowing it down, usually it was Somber and another one that I'll show you in a moment, and then usually like some sort of third track. Like people could narrow it down to 3 choices, and they're like, I don't know which one of those to pick. So Somber, what do we have to say about Somber? Someone said they definitely know the track and they find it so relaxing. Someone said it gives me the feeling of the mystery is just getting started and the adventure awaits. And someone always feels relieved whenever they hear it. We have Somber giving someone nostalgia. And then this one seems like the music really, again, puts them into the game, paints a good picture for them. Whenever I hear Somber in TRT, it takes me directly into the game, as if I'm hanging out in the lobby where Lisa and Hotchkiss sit. I can imagine the fireplace roaring in the background, wanting to curl up into one of the chairs with a good book. So that's what people had to say about Somber. And then what came out in our top 5 for Treasure in the Royal Tower. So here's our other popular one, and you can see that the voting was actually kind of relatively close for these two. Warm gets 24.8% of the vote. And generally when people were saying like, I had a hard time choosing, they would say that they narrowed it down to Somber and Warm, and then usually the third one would either be Enchanted or TRT. That's kind of in the final running, the top 3. And I do recall, I think Warm got a lot of praise for the harpsichord. We'll get back to that in a little bit. So that was our second place track. And then Enchanted with 19% of the vote, and TRT with 8.6%, and Library gets 5.7%. And just Enchanted did quite well. So you do see we have a pretty clear like top 3 for this game. And people who like Enchanted commented on how it has a very haunting and mysterious sound to it. And then yes, okay, what I was thinking, I'm looking at my notes now. So Warm, people love the harpsichord. And even though the discovery track for this game didn't make the top 5, that one also got a lot of praise for Kevin Manthey's use of the harpsichord. And then general comments about this soundtrack. Again, a very common one was people talking about how they find this one nostalgic. Someone listed out their top 3. They said this was the first game they played. They have tons of nostalgia for it. And Enchanted, TRT, and Somber, anytime they hear those, they get filled with nostalgia. And they said that those tracks tell stories, the environments come to life, and I feel like I'm walking around a castle in the winter, cozied up next to a roaring fire, reading a historical novel while eating a plate full of chicken drumsticks. The strings, the way the scores were written, the whole thing, just in love. And someone said this is a go-to track for them on a snowy day. Kevin Manthey did a fantastic job of creating music that genuinely makes the listener feel cold, but also cozy. And then we get praise for the instrumentation and styling of this soundtrack. Someone saying that they do feel like the instruments in this score completely transports me to 18th century France. The use of harpsichord and strings makes for one of the more romantic Nancy soundtracks. And then another really great comment. This old school Nancy Drew soundtrack perfectly creates a balance between a mystery theme, what is Nancy Drew, and creating a direct ambiance, specifically late 1700s France. I feel transported in time. And they just really liked that balance. They felt like this soundtrack managed to get the location music down right. It gives you that tie to France, but then also feeling like just Nancy Drew mystery. So it's not too much of kind of that more general feel, and it's not too much of the old time France feel. It's just right. So they really liked that balance. So that is what people had to say about Treasure in the Royal Tower. And now let's move on to the final scene. So I will say, just even before we get into this, the final scene really had 2 tracks vying for the top spot. As I recall, as I was looking at the results, they kept vying for supremacy as the votes were coming in, and the track that ended up winning beat the other one by just 1 vote. So we will talk about that track, but really just keep in mind we're really honestly looking more at a 2-way tie for this one. So the final scene's most beloved track is Maya with 30.5% of the vote. And what people have to say about Maya, someone said, this is what I play in my head when I think about this game. Maya feels like the theme music for this game, captures the mystery and the theatrical setting. And I loved this comment, someone who just loves Maya so much that anytime the track comes on in the game, they will just stop in place and let it finish so they don't accidentally trigger a new song. This person's saying, I think it has vivacious vibes and a good energy without the weird bits in the other songs. And again, a musically driven comment. I love the strong entrance. I think the melody is completely enchanting and the percussion adds such perfect dramatic flair. I also love how it's used in the game during the opening letter, and then when we see Maya in the magician's room. So what did Maya defeat by only 1 vote? Let's take a look at our graph. So the other one that was vying for the top spot, so you're looking at basically 60% of the vote coming just for these 2 tracks. We have Sleuth with 29.5% of the vote. So what do people have to say about Sleuth? Lots of comments about how this is just great, kind of classic sounding investigation music. Someone said, I appreciate the old school style. This song always made me snap my fingers along the way. Someone talking about gives me vintage mystery vibes from the 60s or 70s. And then I appreciate this comment because I feel the same way. Someone thinks that Sleuth gives off Pink Panther vibes, and I totally agree with you. And after that, we have Magic with 7.6% of the vote, Thompson with 5.7%, and then 5.7% also saying that they don't know this soundtrack. Now, before I go on to general comments about this soundtrack, I do just want to, as an aside, note that this was the first soundtrack in the results, and possibly, I'm trying to remember, possibly the only soundtrack where lots of people drew my attention to the danger tracks. Like, they had something positive to say about the danger tracks, in particular Danger 2. One person actually said that Danger 2 is their second favorite Nancy Drew track of all time. And someone talked about, they said, special shout out to the danger music in this game. Really makes you feel like you are in a dire situation that you need to fix right this second. So again, I just found it noteworthy that, because the danger tracks in this survey, they're not popular, but people definitely took the time to comment on the danger tracks for this game. And even if it's not your favorite, it's important and it's special. So I found those comments interesting. And then general comments about the final scene. I did have some people who said they wanted to vote for the Bee's Knees track. And I will just mention that one didn't make it in. I was going off the list in terms of what was in ND walkthroughs, the ND walkthroughs videos on Hugh's channel. And also in terms of, like, if you buy the soundtrack from her interactive store, what will you hear? And I know Bee's Knees is not in Hugh's videos, and I don't think it's on the, like, official one you can get from the store. So that's just why I left it out, because it seems like it's, even though it's music, it's not considered officially a part of the final scene soundtrack. So that's why it wasn't a voting option. And so just think of it in terms of Jane's Game Portal music. That one didn't make it in either. And I realize this is not perfectly consistent because the banjo tracks made it in for Secret of Shadow Ranch, so I don't really have an explanation for why does one minigame's music make it but not others. Just the way it worked out. I don't think it really would have swayed the voting in any way. So let's go back to general comments. If I'm being honest, letting my personal views speak here, I was expecting a lot of negativity about this soundtrack, and that's not what people had to say. They had something else to say that made me stop and think, like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So someone praising the soundtrack, they said it's so stressful, but it's so good. This person wanted to give a standing ovation, and I'm going to tell you why. I firmly believe that this game's atmosphere wouldn't be nearly as eerie and suspenseful without this A+++ quality soundtrack. The music has a quality that, at times, makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand up and adds to the overall uncomfortable vibe of the game. Another person, again, they felt like these tracks really transition well into each other, and even the more like upbeat ones have this kind of ominous feel to them because of how they're written, and they just think it really immerses you in the environment. And someone loved the use of carnival music. They thought that's just a top tier way to use that kind of music, and the subtle ticking clock, goosebumps. And then this person, this was a great comment. I know a lot of people don't enjoy the vibes of this game, and I think the music probably accounts for quite a bit of that. The way tracks fade away and get overtaken by spooky ambiance is really unsettling. The danger tracks are especially stressful in this one. I also noticed that the tracks sometimes sound very distant, like you're overhearing the sounds from another room. I think that's a really cool choice. And again, just to be clear, I'm not saying that there weren't any negative comments about this. There were definitely negative comments about the final scene, and kind of what ended up happening was I got the sense that this soundtrack is kind of a love it or hate it type soundtrack because of how it's written. It makes it very polarizing, because you had those kind of comments that I just addressed, like people who really love and respect the creepiness and the ambiance that this music creates, but then there were some others who really, for the same reasons, they just can't stand this soundtrack. But overall, actually, this soundtrack was very well spoken of, and certainly drew my attention to the fact of how much people seem to think that this one in particular really just, it is essential to the whole feel of the mystery, and really just feels appropriate for the intenseness of the situation, and Nancy being on a clock trying to save Maya from danger. So that is the final scene, and let's take a look now at Secret of the Scarlet Hand. And people, you're not ready. You are not ready for this result. I promise you, you're not ready for how this one went. Because our number one track is Exotic at 67.3% of the vote. You didn't think I was being serious, did you? Did any of us think that anything other than Exotic was going to win Secret of the Scarlet Hand? I certainly hope not. Like, in terms of results that I felt sure about, like pretty much would be willing to stake my life on them. I was so sure. I was like, Exotic is going to win. I think it's going to win by a lot. And it did, because as you can see, this is our first one that gets well over 50% of the vote. It's almost at 70% of the votes if we're rounding up. So Exotic is winning by a landslide. So what do people have to say about Exotic? I got my slides out of order, so we'll back up to the pie chart momentarily. Do I need to say more? Dances. Fun and boppy. Hands down my favorite song on the whole soundtrack. Every time it comes on when I play, I stop and dance. I have someone who loves the smooth guitar. I liked this comment. I cannot trust anyone that says they don't like Exotic and doesn't dance or at least bop their head to the song. 20 out of 10. This song is iconic. I don't make the rules. This one made me smile. I picked Exotic because it's just girly pop. And again, people talking about it's groovy. We gotta dance to this song when it plays. And great comment at the bottom. Has anyone succeeded in not dancing along to Exotic? And to those who answer no, why you lying? So lots of love for Exotic. And because it won by so much, I don't know, just a thought in the back of my head, like I'm curious, like what would everyone say is their second favorite track? if you voted for Exotic, what is your second favorite track in this game? If we had just taken Exotic out of the equation entirely, what would people have voted for? And just an interesting thought. And if you do have a second favorite that you want to comment on, you can certainly tell me about that. So let's go back to our results. So again, big differential. We've got Scribe with 9.6% of the vote, and then 6.7% don't know the soundtrack. Town gets 5.8% of the vote, and Lab got 2.9%. And then there were a couple just comments about Town that I appreciated. Just someone who thinks this track really gives them an overwhelming sense of peace, and so they listen to it a lot regularly. And someone else who just appreciated the spacious feeling, like I'm welcomed in to solve the mystery with full confidence at my own pace. And then people like Scribe and some similar like Pakal and Dark, some of those ones that lean more into the Maya sound, they really help think that those tracks help make the atmosphere of the game. And then just some general comments about this soundtrack. Someone said, I don't love this soundtrack. It's nostalgic, but when I listen to the tracks individually, I find them to be too mellow, and Exotic is the only exception. So that was more of a negative comment about this one. And then some people in terms of more positive comments, someone just said, I can't pick a favorite, they're all too good. Someone said this is the perfect soundtrack to dance to. Every song encompasses a great Mayan vibe, matching every part of Mayan culture in Pakal's time period. So that is what we have for Secret of the Scarlet Hand. So again, I really don't think any of us should be surprised by this, because we all know we didn't need a survey to tell us how much people love Exotic. Like, if you've been in this fandom for any amount of time, you know Exotic is just one of those legendary tracks in our fandom. So let's move on now to Ghost Dogs of Moon Lake and see what the favorite was for that one. And this was a high percentage that me personally, I don't know, I guess I found it surprising it was that high. Maybe I shouldn't. If you agree or disagree, you can let me know. Like, does this result make sense to you? We have Day coming in at 41% of the vote. And I guess, Day is a great track. I guess it just surprised me. I thought maybe at least one of the jazzier tracks would get a lot more attention, but this one did quite well. So it doesn't reach the 50% and above mark, but 41% is a good chunk of the vote. So what do people have to say about Day? Our very own Rue, who works for the marketing team of Her Interactive, she was kind enough to take this survey for me. And so she left this comment: walking outside to a beautiful sunny day, I basically hear the Day soundtrack playing in my mind. Someone said that they love this track because it has a bright sound to it, while the plucking of the strings and flowiness makes me think of birds flying around freely outside while walking through the park. So again, music as storytelling, painting a picture for us, the instrumentation giving that sense of birds. This was an amusing one. The trauma that Day brings to all of those who spent hours hunting for bugs in the woods is a no-brainer pick for me. And someone who said it's catchy and uplifting, always makes me feel a little better playing a game with spooky things in the dark. Literally spring in a song, and then someone saying Day makes me so happy and is instantly recognizable to me as being from Dog. So I guess, again, just being refreshed by these comments, like, yeah, I can see why this one ended up with 41% of the vote. because it definitely kind of stands out on this soundtrack with that upbeat, bright, happy tone to it. So what else did well for Ghost Dogs of Moon Lake? We have Malone getting 21% of the vote, and people who voted for that one, there was a lot of comments along the lines of they just really enjoy the jazzy sound, and it feels very good vibes for investigation, and they liked the connection to the speakeasy. Then Moon gets 17.1% of the vote. Nostalgia gets 11.4%, and Forest got 3.8%. And then general comments about this soundtrack. Someone feels that this one is a nice mixture of relaxing and spooky. And someone who had a hard time choosing a favorite just because they think, again, talking about location and embodying the location and the atmosphere. This person said they had a hard time choosing because Kevin Manthe is always so good at capturing the vibe of the game for every situation. Someone is of the opinion that this is the best soundtrack in the entire series. Every single track has purpose and invites players even further into the game. And then this comment, someone said, for being classified as a, quote, scary Nancy Drew game, this one has some very nice and cozy music. Now, as critical comments, someone said, so far this is the least memorable soundtrack of the classic games for me, but it still brings good memories. And then here's an interesting comment. Hot take, but I hate this soundtrack. Day, Moon, and Nostalgia all grate on my nerves. I think the flute and plucked strings vibe totally destroy the suspenseful atmosphere. I wish they would have leaned more into the period pieces like Malone. That one's solid. So just that person, instrumentation and the styling doesn't work for them, and they're kind of missing that sense of, okay, we have this 1920s element going on. Why doesn't the soundtrack reflect that in more ways? So some good insightful comments about Ghost Dogs. And now let's take a look at the Haunted Carousel. So our number one track for this game is Ballroom with 27.5% of the vote. And let me move on. Take a look at this. Despite this being the winner, people who voted for it didn't really have anything to say about it. Someone said they love it for its spookiness, and then just someone who apparently, compared to everything else in this soundtrack, really loves it, they just said Ballroom all day, every day. And just a theory in terms of how is it that we get to this one that comes out on top, but people who are voting for it hardly have anything to say about it. Just my theory is, even though people are willing to say, like, yeah, that's my favorite, like they don't, it's not their favorite in the sense that they really, really love it, or they have really strong emotional attachment to it. And to be honest, that makes a lot of sense, because I don't have any sense that the Haunted Carousel is a particularly popular soundtrack in the fandom. I don't think it's one that people are just going and seeking out as something to listen to. So to me, it just makes a lot of sense that, okay, yeah, Ballroom wins, but whatever, doesn't mean we care all that much about it. So I thought that was very telling. Runner-up track, however. Oh, did people have things to say about this one? And as soon as I show it to you, and maybe you've already guessed which one it is, this will make a lot of sense why people who love this one had things to say about it. Carousel B gets 15.7% of the vote. And I have someone saying, forever burned into my skull, and I like it that way. And Carousel B is a puzzle within the game, and it makes it stand out the most for me. The notes, A, E, D, G, F, A, that is my reasoning. I liked this one. I need you to know it took me 0.05 seconds to click on Carousel B. And then this one, let's just list out the whole melody that Nancy has to listen to on the band organ. A, E, D. Honestly, shouldn't I be singing it? A, E, D, E, F, E, A, E, D, C, B, A. Need I say more? It's ingrained in my memory for life. So this makes a lot of sense to me. Even though there kind of is, like, percentage-wise, a noticeable gap between Ballroom and Carousel B, it just makes a lot of sense to me that people who voted for this one definitely had something to say about it, because Carousel B is one of those unique tracks where the music is an essential part of the game because it's part of a puzzle, and we actually have to figure out what the melody notes are so that we can play them for miles. So it just makes sense. Like this one, for a lot of you, it is wrapped up in your memories of playing this game. So I was not surprised that this happened. What else do we have? After those two, we have Miles getting 10.8% of the vote. Carnival gets 8.8%. And Prowl also gets 8.8% of the vote. Now, I already mentioned earlier, I had a theory. My theory is Ballroom, like, people don't really have anything to say about it because people just in general aren't huge fans of this soundtrack. So it's like, okay, well, I'm picking a favorite of something I don't even love all that much. So well, there are positive comments about this soundtrack, but this one in particular, lots more negative comments. Well, not a lot more, I don't think, but there were more negative comments about this soundtrack than positive ones. So, starting on the positive side, someone said they have a lot of nostalgia for the music. Takes them right back to 2003. Someone actually has this soundtrack in their top 5, and they like that the music sounds mysterious, but also amusement park at the same time. Someone who liked they liked the carnival-y sound, thought that was appropriate. Someone called it a twisted circus score, perfect for an empty amusement park. So, I think that's fitting. And someone who just thinks Kevin Manthey did a good job making the music fit the amusement park setting. Also, a lot of these tracks are genuinely really unsettling, very much scary clown vibes. Keeping all that in mind, again, it makes sense to me. This one becomes polarizing because I feel like when you're dealing with that carnival / amusement park sound, this is one of those things, and adding in the factor of a lot of it's meant to sound creepy, it makes it very polarizing that you end up either loving the music or hating it. And there's a lot of people who really, really do not like that vibe. So someone said, no, I will not listen to creepy clown music. No, thank you. I refuse. Nope, nope, nope. Now one person, they were expecting the music to be better since the game is based around an amusement park, and they just don't think the soundtrack's all that great. So maybe it's not so much that they don't like amusement park music, they just don't think this one works. And someone who called this soundtrack, they said it's their most despised game soundtrack. So lots of people don't like this one, and they let me know. So this is kind of the first one that really hit in a negative sense, and kind of similar to the final scene. Again, just, the effect that Kevin Manthey's going for. Some people really love it, some people can't stand it. So that is the Haunted Carousel. And now let's move on to what I am representing, if you can see it past the mic. with my sweatshirt today. Danger on Deception Island. What came out on top for Danger on Deception Island? We have Jig getting 45.5% of the vote. So not quite achieving that true majority threshold, but way up there. This is a very popular one. So what do people have to say about Jig? Come on, how can anyone pick something other than Jig? Who were you if the Hot Kettle Cafe wasn't your favorite spot? And someone says Jig lives rent-free in their brain. And this comment, I knew this one without having to listen because I love this track so much. It's so fun. It's a favorite all-time track for one person. Someone who voted for Jig because they are humming it very frequently. We have this one being called Utterly Joyous and Delightful. And then this one, all of the music in Danger on Deception Island is wonderful. So as usual, I had to go with a song I want to dance to, Jig. And then one commenter who loves the sense of adventure when they listen to it. And let's see what else we have after Jig. Siren gets 11.9% of the vote. And one person said Siren is a very nostalgic track, makes them feel safe. Another person said it's beautiful and atmospheric, makes them feel at ease whenever they listen. And someone else says immediately washes over me with a sense of calm, practically transports me into a meditative trance. I love it. So Siren giving off a very specific feel and a deep sense of peace. And then Dirge gets 10.9% of the vote. Pub also, so those were a tie. Pub gets 10.9% of the vote, which interesting. Pub and Jig in one sense are the same music, and just in the sense like there's same melody in spots. So there's a sense in which you can say like the melody for Jig and Pub, like that gets about 55% of the vote. And then Mystery got 6.9% of the vote. But I will just say, for having these favorites, the predominant comment about Danger on Deception Island, we do have winners, but there were lots and lots and lots of comments of people saying it was difficult to choose or just nigh on impossible. There were definitely multiple people who they didn't even vote for a favorite. They could not pick a favorite. So despite the fact that Jig comes out on top really strongly, quite frankly, I don't put a ton of stock in that in terms of like, oh, Jig is just in a class of its own, towering above the rest. Like really, like yes, there were a lot of people willing to say, yes, that's my favorite. This is more like Jig is the best of the best. People who just think that Danger on Deception Island, like everything on the soundtrack is great. So even if we like this one track more than the others, like really everything is excellent. I just had lots of people shouting at me though about I can't choose. Don't ask me to choose. You're asking me to pick my favorite child. I don't skip anything on this soundtrack, like that kind of comment. And I did appreciate someone who said like if you had me take this survey again tomorrow, I'd probably pick a different one. So that should just give you an idea that this game's soundtrack really gets people excited. A lot of love for it, a lot of respect for every single track, and just so many positive comments, people calling it iconic, memorable. Someone said, I hate cold, foggy, rainy places, and yet every time I listen to DDI's music, I pine for the Pacific Northwest. People appreciating how it adds to the environment and the atmosphere. lots of love for the sea shanty tunes. And just this soundtrack also kind of having a lot of personality. So one person pointing out the heartache and yearning from Dirge competing against the jovial and jaunty Jig, and the curious nature of Siren, hardest choice yet. So just a lot of color to this soundtrack. There really isn't one sound to it. Like, everything just has such a different feel to it. And people who just really, really deeply love the soundtrack, they really like the discovery music, they like how cozy it is. I loved this, someone, all caps, shouting at me, "This entire soundtrack is a literal, tangible, gorgeous, haunting vibe, and how dare you make me choose a favorite? The entire soundtrack is my favorite." I love the discovery success tracks. Having to choose between Dirge, Mystery, Jig, Pub, and Siren is criminal. You are killing me. So take that kind of comment, like that's the predominant feeling about this one. Just such a beloved soundtrack. Makes a lot of sense to me. I'm a big fan of this one, and I know it's very popular in the fandom. So that is Danger on Deception Island, Secret of Shadow Ranch. My personal favorite game, so I was very invested in seeing the results for this one. And for Secret of Shadow Ranch, our top track was Ballad with 21.2% of the vote. And what people had to say about Ballad. Ballad makes my heart ache. It's one of those first tracks you think of when talking about this game. Very western, smooth, jazzy almost. Someone who likes that it hits the ranch setting and they hear this music and it immediately takes them to the game. Someone who thinks it captures the mood really well. And again, just another comment, just this sense of like Ballad really somehow just fitting the overall game really well. You can't not choose Ballad. Ballad is Shadow Ranch. And then someone said that it always makes me feel at home whenever I listen to it. Now you probably already noticed, Ballad only got about 21% of the vote. That's not a lot. So we're talking about this track doesn't even get a quarter of people's votes. And when you see the pie chart like this, oh, this got me so excited. This result is so telling to me. Look at this. I had to give more than 5 so that you could actually see all of the results, because look at the spread for this one. This one is all over the map because there's a favorite for everyone in this game. So you have Ballad, but then after that you get Francis with 16.3% of the vote. Then Swing, 13.5%. Then comes Dirk, a little bit behind that. Desert, a little bit behind that. And Drive is tied with Desert. And then a little bit behind those is Land. So you're looking at kind of this little bit of a gap between each one in terms of what is people's favorite. And that made so much sense. Again, I got a lot of comments about this soundtrack of people saying it's hard to choose. And I think that says something noteworthy about this soundtrack, that it just has so many top quality ones that hit a different vibe, that's why it's all over the map. So yeah, some people might like that kind of western, like melancholy feeling of Ballad, but then maybe some other person really likes, Swing. It's so upbeat. And these other ones, I will definitely highlight some things that people said about these. But I loved this. I'm glad this soundtrack yielded this result, that it just seems pretty much everything on it is top quality, and people, it's just whatever you like. And so there is There really is no like definitive favorite because everything about it is excellent. So, the banjos. I do want to comment on the banjos. There are some people who enjoy the banjo tracks that play in the the script game when you get the Dry Creek script, but there were some people who did just point out like, yeah, I like this soundtrack, give me anything but the banjo track. So the banjo tracks do annoy some people, but really overall, like, this is just everything lands really well from Shadow Ranch. So on Francis, one person actually said that they bought a violin just so they could learn how to play Francis. And again, Swing enjoyed for being a bop. Desert, this will not surprise anyone. People very passionate about the electric guitar in Desert and wanting the world to know, like, I love that electric guitar. It is so well done. And for Drive, people like how adventurous it sounds. Someone said that that track made them feel like they were in a Western. So, again, I just really liked, you know, whichever one people are voting for, they can say something particular that they love about it. General comments about the soundtrack. Someone said that they sing along to the music in this game whenever they play it, so that to them is a sign of how good the music is. Lots of people just saying the soundtrack is a masterpiece. It's very nostalgic. And for everyone that I could find who really doesn't like the banjo tracks, I could also find people who said even the banjo tunes slap. So, no bad tracks for them. And some very lengthy comments also. Just people having a lot to say about this one. So, I appreciated this one comment from someone talking about they appreciate the instruments and they think they're used really deliberately and perfectly for the game. So they like the use of guitar, banjo, fiddle, and I loved the descriptions this person gave. Ballad gets you right in the homestead heart. The banjo tunes are all fire. Curse is legit, so spooky. Desert literally makes my mouth feel dry. Dirk is a simple yet lovely tune, and Drive puts me right on Bob's back with horse trivia questions running through my brain. In the end, it had to be Francis, so this person voted for Francis, reasoning being pretty, southern, romantic, with those lovely strings and guitar. It's perfect. And then they wanted to shout out other ones. They said, no, actually, just all of them get a sound shout out. And I definitely think the amazing score for this game is one of the reasons it's such a fan favorite. And someone thinks that this is the most perfect soundtrack, that it perfectly fits Western Ranchers vibe. They like the variety of instruments you can hear. Loved the electric guitar, wish there had been more. And yes, okay, this comment, I think this kind of encapsulates what's going on with the voting for this one. There is a song for every taste in music. So obviously with these kind of things, when we're voting on music, there's always going to be a sense in which just personal listening preference comes into it. And Secret of Shadow Ranch, despite being Western all the way through in a sense, all the tracks kind of have their own personality and hit a different style. So it's whatever your taste is, you can find something in this game to enjoy. So I thought that comment kind of really just conveys what's going on with this one and why the voting was what it was. So now let's move on to Curse of Blackmore Manor and see what the favorite was here. Memoirs with 54.7% of the vote. So again, we have another track getting a true majority of the vote. And this result did not surprise me because when I posted my piano cover for this track, I had more than one person comment on it and say this is my favorite Nancy Drew track of all time. And I just have always had the sense that Memoirs is very popular in the fandom. So this one, I was totally expecting this. So what do people have to say about Memoirs? Loved hearing this again from Rue. She says Memoirs is probably my fave track ever. Rue, I agree with you. Someone said it gives me the feeling of walking around an old English manor castle, and I love that. Song is classic, perfect, somber yet studious, fits the environment superbly, and feels like gradually waking up to solve a mystery. The strings and piano working together, so it's uplifting yet heavy, light and dark. I loved this comment. This person saying, this game has always scared me, so this song is my safe song within the game. I really liked that. And then the last one, just awakens something magical in my soul. So, Memoirs, it's like this one, it's an all-timer. Like that is the sense I have always gotten about this track. Like if we're talking best Nancy Drew tracks of all time, there's a good chance Memoirs is at or near the top. And then our results for others. We have Brigitte / The Ballad of Brigitte with 10.4%. So I'm not sure specifically if when people were voting whether they had the instrumental that plays in the credits in mind, or had the actual, like, the song with lyrics that you heard sung in the game. But either way, it's that song coming in second place, then Fairy with 9.4%, and Renaissance tying with that, and then Empire sliding in for that 5th spot at 7.5%. But this was another one where I had lots of people yelling at me saying, how do I choose one? And people just giving entire lists of, like, these are all the great tracks in this soundtrack. And there was just a lot of very passionate praise for this soundtrack, and people saying it is their favorite soundtrack. So, very beloved. This makes a lot of sense to me. I always, again, just known this one's got a lot of fans. So let's look at general comments. Rue actually did say, this game's whole soundtrack is my favorite. Again, another person saying, this is their favorite soundtrack. They love how atmospheric the music is. Someone saying, I'm a sucker for strings, moody sounding scores, and mystery. These scores have an eeriness to them that reflects the mystery of the game, but they also have a somberness and pride to them. The Penvillins have a rich history. Linda and Jane's lives are changing. The scores bring out that off feeling very well, yet still add the pride the Penvillins hold for their traditions and history. And someone saying this soundtrack ripped me apart and put me back together in the best way possible. Blackmore Manor would not be the same without this soundtrack. And just saying, it is perfection. Someone said Kevin Manthe needs a standing ovation for this one. Literally every track is amazing and once again adds so much to the overall vibe of the setting and atmosphere in game. Someone put this one up with Scarlet Hand and Danger on Deception Island for best soundtrack, for just really immersing you in the game. And someone loves the energy of it, called it dark, medieval, and mystical. So definitely, yes, we have Memoirs as the clear favorite, but then also just the soundtrack overall gets a lot of love. These were results that did not in any way surprise me. Now, let's look at Secret of the Old Clock. Our favorite for that one is Amuse with 37.5% of the vote. And And for Amuse, someone's saying it's the embodiment of the 30s. So again, so we're seeing some praise here that it really captures the decade that Secret of the Old Clock is taking place in. I loved this comment. To this day, this is still probably my favorite comment in this entire survey. Was this one right here. There are two types of people in this world: people who say that Amuse is a certified bot, and liars. So I just love, it was very straightforward. If you don't love this track, you're lying. Someone who whistles it a lot, and this was an interesting comment, just pointing out Amuse and Common have a similarity, but this one won out for them just because of stronger game associations, and that actually happened. I pulled out a comment beneath that too. Again, just noting like, hey, those two tracks kind of sound similar, but they like Amuse a little bit more. And let's take a look at our graph. Very telling to what I just said. If Amuse was the top one, then Common came out as the next most popular with 15.4%. Then we get Gloom and Lilac tying at 11.5%, and Melody gets 5.8%. And general comments about this one. More than one comment saying that they find this to be an underrated soundtrack and people sleep on this one. And I'm wondering if that comment, because I love this soundtrack, ranks very high for me. So I'm thinking, if I had to guess, that comment maybe is stemming from Secret of the Old Clock as a game. Tends not to be one that you hear come up a lot as big fan favorites. So I think maybe that's the sense people are seizing on, that the soundtrack maybe doesn't get as much love as they think it should, because people tend not to love on the game a whole lot. And so when you have that, like, the soundtrack kind of automatically might just get set by the wayside, because if you're not playing the game and talking about the game, you're not necessarily going to be talking about its music either. I loved this comment, someone saying it reminds me of the Monsters, Inc. soundtrack. I'm thinking because of those very strong jazz music vibes, and someone likes the cheeriness of this one. It's their go-to when they need cheery vibes and need to be put in a good mood. That came up more than once. Like, this is a good mood soundtrack. This is what you listen to when you need to feel good. And a lot of appreciation just for, again, how much the music is appropriate for like 30s and 40s time period, and love for the brass instruments, and how the soundtrack just puts us in the game. So that was kind of the sense of good comments. There were some people who don't really love this one. Someone thinks it's just okay because they find that the songs are very similar to each other, which, again, if you think about some people commenting on Amuse and Common sounding similar and trying to vote between the two, yeah, it makes sense to me that when you have all of this period era, like, jazzy music, that some people would listen to that and think it all sounds the same. Because someone else did also say that they just find, even though they like the jazzy upbeat tracks, everything just kind of blends in with each other. So they weren't crazy about the soundtrack for that reason. They just thought that was an interesting comment. But overall, this one, very popular because of its sound. And now we move on to Last Train to Blue Moon Canyon. And our most popular track for that one is Melody with 25.5% of the vote. Someone said it's moody, it makes me feel alive. Someone who loves the flute. another who finds it hauntingly beautiful. And this comment was interesting. We're gonna come back to this one. Keep this feedback in mind. There isn't anything super memorable to me for this game, specifically outside of melody. So kind of in a sense, that person was voting for melody because it was the one that they remember most. And then there was just someone who really, they liked the melody for melody, but they just wish that the track were longer. And then our top 5 for this one, after melody comes Society with almost 20% of the vote. Then Camille with 17%. So again, I see here a little bit of kind of get this like pretty clear top 3. And then Train with 11.3%. And then I thought this was interesting. I'm so excited to talk about this. Escape getting 7.5% of the vote. So we'll come back to that. But people like Society, they think it's peaceful, and someone picked it because of how much you just hear it in the game on the train, so they just feel like it just becomes part of the train. And some people who voted for Camille, they just love how beautiful it is, and softness and gentleness. And people who were going with Train talked about it being epic, and they love the orchestral sound. But then again, despite it being the 5th ranked one, the one just that I wanted to draw attention to is Escape actually making the top 5, because and I clearly forgot about this when I was talking about the final scene earlier. This is the first time that we have a danger track making the top 5. And someone said, I can vividly imagine trying to get out of the mines in that rickety old cart and trying my best to not kill Nancy. So I just thought that was fantastic that here finally we have a danger track that's just so well done that like it actually is some people's favorite. I just think that's really cool, because I really wasn't expecting the danger tracks to do well at all in this survey, just because of how stressful and dangerous they are. But now for Last Train to Blue Moon Canyon, the soundtrack as a whole. This one was an interesting one in terms of results, because it kind of swings again in 2 different directions. So some people, they really love this one. They think that it fits the game exceptionally well, and you get that. But there were actually quite a few comments about this soundtrack of people saying it's not memorable. So I already shared that one comment of someone who voted for melody because it's really the only track that they can remember from the game. But someone else also did. They said it's just a forgettable soundtrack. Other than Train, which is the big orchestra one, they just think this is kind of a average. Not too excited about it. And also, I know another comment I pulled out about melody, the person who wished it had been longer. Again, they were choosing melody, but they weren't necessarily gung-ho about it, because they just, overall, they don't love this game's music. And there was another person who just said, nope, this one's not really my favorite. So this one was interesting to me, maybe because I know that Last Train to Blue Moon Canyon is, I think it's fair to say it's one of the most popular games in the fandom, but it seems for quite a few of you, though you may feel that way about the game, or at least some people out there, like the soundtrack is not reaching that same level. Because despite having, something really epic like Train playing during that cutscene, there's just people not finding a whole lot to latch onto with this one. So I thought that was just very interesting that such a popular game, not such a popular soundtrack. So I found that neat. This was a neat and exciting result for me. Not in the sense like, not that I find enjoyment in Last Train's soundtrack getting lots of negative comments, but just like, oh, okay, very interesting. So now let's take a look at Danger by Design. And Danger by Design's favorite track is Moulin with 24% of the vote. And someone said this soundtrack isn't my favorite, but this is a fun one to play to. And someone said this track, among a couple others, always takes them back to their time of living in France. And then this one I enjoy, just those first 4 notes are enough for me to recognize this melody. But again, what you're noticing here is, despite this one being the favorite, people didn't have a whole lot to say about it. Does my theory about ballroom stand here? Not entirely sure. And maybe this is just one of those, like, you love something and you can't really explain why, so I just didn't get comments about it. But I did want to move on to the second place winner, because there were quite a few comments about this one. And these were quite close in the voting. Cafe got 21.2% of the vote and generated quite a few comments. So again, we have this running theme of being transported to the game and kind of putting you exactly in location. So this one person feels like, yep, I'm at a Paris cafe when I hear this one. And another person talking about, like, as soon as they hear it, there they are, walking around the park, and they're doing the haggling with the vendors and outsmarting the squirrel. Another person who said they like that it's a very springy tune while also feeling location specific. There's someone who enjoys the peppy sound of it. And similar to that, someone picking this one because it's probably the one that I bop around to most when it plays. So again, just appreciating that upbeat quality to the music. And I did just want to also mention one other comment, this also from Rue. She did not vote for Cafe as her favorite, but she did just leave a comment saying the amount of times I used the Cafe track in old ads. So, popular one for marketing. That makes a lot of sense to me. Like, if I kind of stop and think about music that I've heard in her interactive ads over the years, yes, I've heard this one a lot. So let's see what else we have. After those two, we get Wistful with 13.5%. Then Paris gets 10.6%. And Metro, 9.6% of the vote. So this one is more like you kind of have a clear top two. They're vying basically for 45% of the vote. And then 3 kind of filling in the gap. And then general comments about Danger by Design. Someone who loves the use of typically French instruments, especially the saxophone and the accordion. Love for, again, it fits the atmosphere and the location. So lots of praise on that front. There was someone who said this is a delightful score that may be better than the game itself. I'm just going to editorialize and say not maybe, is better than the game itself. And someone who said that this one particularly, for whatever reason, they desperately want Clue Crew people who play different instruments to all get together to perform it. And actually, I'm guessing that one makes sense to me because there's a lot of different instruments in this soundtrack. Yeah, like it would be fun to get a whole group of musicians together to try to do this one live. But despite those positive comments, there were quite a few negative comments about this one. Just people saying, I just don't love it. Someone who thought it had potential, but it just didn't land for them. And someone who said this game has kind of a weak soundtrack in my opinion. None of the tracks are bad per se, they just feel kind of bland. Maybe they just sound too similar to each other, or there's not enough depth or something. I don't know. So again, you kind of have that split opinion, so maybe this comes down just to taste or what our ear is picking up on when we listen. I don't know, but so I would put this one in it's like a hit or a miss depending on who you ask. So again, interesting. If we back up a little bit, think about where we are in the game order now. We had Danger on Deception Island and Secret of Shadow Ranch, Curse of Blackmore Manor. Tons and tons of praise. You all love those soundtracks. Then we get to Secret of the Old Clock. Pretty well loved by most people. And then Last Train in Blue Moon Canyon. And now here with Danger by Design, we're starting to get, for every positive comment we get, start getting some negativity too. So does this pattern continue? Well, keep listening and we shall see. Creature of Kapu Cave. What's our favorite track for this one? It is Aloha with, we'll just say, a third of the vote goes to Aloha. And people said this is ideal beach vibes. Someone who was just able to pick it without even thinking. And someone saying, well, I don't really know if I have a favorite just because I don't listen to it that much, but when they were listening, they thought this one was the most relaxing. And this one puts one listener on vacation. And I liked this one. I love that the first track didn't make me want to play this game, but instead made me want to watch Lilo and Stitch. LOL. So there's Aloha for you. And then other favorites after that, we have Bugs with 24.8%. So again, this is another instance where we kind of have two that take up a significant chunk of the voting. And then with the others, we have Discovery with 10.5%. And tied for that is people saying they don't know the soundtrack. And then Immersion gets 7.6%. And just because Bugs did pretty well in the voting, I did pull out some comments about that one. So someone said that Bugs, the track Bugs, is the only thing that they like about this game. And someone said it's quite the quirky tune to a rather quirky game. And another person who feels like Bugs matches the game's energy well. And then general comments about this soundtrack. All right, this is one where definitively way more negative comments about this soundtrack than positive. So some people did say that they feel like Creature of Kapu Cave's soundtrack showcases the atmosphere and the setting really well and has great Hawaiian vibes. And when they listen to this, like, boom, in Hawaii. But there was a pretty consistent negative comment about Creature of Kapu Cave, and that was a lot of people saying this one is not memorable. And basically, if they're not playing the game, they couldn't tell you a single track that comes from this game. They couldn't hum one because they can't remember anything. And for some people, part of the issue is they find the music all sounds similar, and so they just get sick of the music and nothing stands out because of how similar a lot of the tracks sound. But then there are other people who they don't find it memorable because they feel like what's going on here is music that's more ambient and atmospheric as opposed to like music. So I thought that was an interesting comment. So maybe it's almost like, yeah, feels Hawaiian, but it's not like musically meaty enough to seize on anything. And then some people who definitely you can tell like their feelings about the game color their feelings about the soundtrack, because there was someone who just says like, this game stinks. And so I just don't have any attachment to anything in this soundtrack. So there's kind of just a lot of different reasons for people not being crazy about this one. But overall, just pretty consistent, like not memorable. If I'm not playing the game, I don't remember any of this game's music. After Hawaii, though, you all know that we move from the warmth of Hawaii to the cold of Canadian wilderness. So White Wolf of Icicle Creek, that game's favorite track is Flurry with 31.4% of the vote. And about Flurry, people said, I like how the music managed to feel cold and snowy, and I think Flurry does that best. Someone who likes the whimsical feel and feels like that matches the game's vibe. Again, someone else calling this one whimsical and wintry. Someone called it peaceful. And then we've got someone saying that it's magical and eerie while being light and subtle. And Flurry being the top, then we get Crackle with 21%, and then not too far behind that comes Icicle, and then Warmth gets 12.4%. And I thought this one was interesting. Olympic got 5.7% of the vote, and Olympic is actually an unused track. So I think this is our first one since Secrets Can Kill, which the voting gives us an unused track, making the top 5. And this is another soundtrack that I would put in the polarizing category. I got probably about equal amounts of positive and negative comments about this one. And on the positive side, there's lots and lots of praise for this one. They think it fits atmosphere really well. That it is a soundtrack that just screams cold, and snow feels icy, puts you in the environment spectacularly. Someone who said, makes me want it to snow in July. And someone who pointed out, like, they feel like the tracks in this game, they're honestly really just established ambiance, but in this case, creating that ambiance so well, like, it actually is really effective. And then someone who thinks that the soundtrack is unique, fits the setting really well, and just overall it's just very cohesive. Like, all the tracks just tie together really well. But again, for all that positivity, you get people who will critique this one, perhaps even for the same reasons. So again, this is just one in terms of what Kevin Manthey was trying to do. It seems to be either it's a hit or a miss for people, and kind of no in between. So, similar to the game we just talked about, there are people who criticize this one. They just find the music very forgettable, and it just kind of disappears into the background very easily, and that the music doesn't stand out. And someone actually did say, like, literally the music is quiet in the game, so they hardly even noticed that this game had music. And then again, with that cold, wintry ambient sound, that disappointed some people in the sense that they didn't like that seems to be all there is to this soundtrack. Because I did get a comment from someone who voted for Olympic, the unused track, which, if you have not heard it, Olympic is the one that has like a very clear melody and kind of structure to it. And so someone said like they felt like that track specifically, it gave life to this soundtrack that otherwise feels like just a very empty soundtrack. And this person did say like this soundtrack feels empty and alone, but maybe that's actually the effect that, you know, the developers were going for. This whole idea of like being kind of in this empty wilderness space. And so they felt like the soundtrack did like channel that vibe. So maybe it was purposeful. And someone who said that they pretty much hate this soundtrack. And there's one little chromatic motif in Crackle that they just find really annoying. And then they just find the soundtrack like it's not enough variety, it's too soft, it's too forgettable. And they also were upset that Olympic doesn't even make the game because they said they cut the one track that kind of has some gusto, which I actually like. So, as I said, again, it seems like Kevin Manthey was definitely going for a certain sound and ambience with this one, and some people really love that, and some people are really disappointed with it. So that was very telling and very polarizing. And now let's take a look at Legend of the Crystal Skull. So our top track for this one is Legend with 35.6% of the vote. And someone said that Legend is their all-time favorite track from the entire series. We've got someone who loves the build-up. And someone connected back to when Train plays during that big cutscene in Last Train to Blue Moon Canyon. Someone likes that this one, like, it plays at a pivotal moment. So when you get a really significant cutscene in this game, this is the track that's playing. And someone says, Legend regularly gets stuck in my head, and I'm not at all mad about it. And people who love the groove. And then this comment is fun. Nothing beats Legend. It is a legend. And then our top 5 for this one. We have Bruno Song with 21.2% of the vote. Then Curio, 19.2%. Jangle. And then Bayou rounding out the other top 5. And there were some people who voted for Bruno Song. Someone who said like that track feels like the theme of the game. And Curio got quite a bit of love. People who just really liked the old time vintage jazz sound and that crackle effect on the music. And then general comments about this soundtrack. Again, keep in mind what I've just been going over. We had those golden era games, 9 through, we'll say 12, doing really well as soundtracks. And then things kind of start to fall off at 13, where people aren't loving it as much. So someone did say for this one, Kevin Manthey is back. He was off his game on the last few, but this one feels like a return to form. So some people who think, yes, Legend of the Crystal Skull musically gets the series back on track. Lots of praise for this one, again, for atmosphere and capturing the New Orleans sound. And there are people who really love the jazziness of it. And there was someone who just personal taste, not crazy about it. And there were someone who did comment also, they feel like this soundtrack borders on quiet. But it has, because of the tracks like Legend and Bayou and others, it kind of helps to offset that. But there was also someone who just said like this one is forgettable to them. But overall, this one gets back to we have more positive comments than negative comments about it. And then moving on to Phantom of Venice, so we're now at the 18th game in the series. The favorite track for that one is Pigeon with 23.3% of the vote. And before we look at the comments for Pigeon, again, I'm just going to point out with this one, this essentially kind of was like a three-way tie vote. And you'll see what the other two tracks are that were in the running. And Pigeon ended up winning by only one vote. So again, we're not talking definitive favorite with this one. But people did say of this one, it's iconic, simple and chill, regularly gets stuck in my head. Someone who associates it with playing Scopa. And again, a comment on iconic notes. And someone who apparently can't get my kazoo version out of their head. Oopsie daisy. I hope that's a good comment and not a bad one. If it's a bad comment, I'm so sorry. And then someone who likes the piccolo instrumentation in this one specifically. But as I said, this one was kind of like a three-way tie. So what we have here is, again, one vote difference between number 1 and number 2 in this game. After Pigeon, right behind it is Tourist. And then very close to that one is Maranata. So you get those three taking up a huge chunk of the vote. And then it drops off. And I actually did the top 6 tracks for this one. So because there was a tie for the 5th place. So Goblin gets 8.7%, and then Creep and Venice were tied at 5.8%. And again, because we have such a tight vote, someone likes Tourist just because it gives them strong memory associations with playing this game. There was someone who really likes the happy, peppy feeling of it. And then Maranata, this one, someone said it's the most joyful walking around Italian streets music. And someone said it feels like Venice. And another person who said it makes me feel as if I'm at the Conde Costa. So it seems like that one in particular does a really good job of taking people into the game and putting them in Venice. And then here with Phantom of Venice, we have quite a lot of comments come in of people having a hard time picking a favorite. And I got the sense from that, like, just overall, people, I think, seem to find this a pretty solid soundtrack. And it just doesn't have that one, like, definitive standout. And for the most part, they pretty much enjoy them all. So there was a lot along those lines. I had some people who would have liked to have voted for one of the Gondolier songs, but again, that's not considered officially part of the soundtrack, so that's why that didn't make this. And someone who said it's a beautiful score that sounds not only Italian, but Venetian in particular. So we'll give kudos to Kevin Manthe for that he had to not just take us to Italy, but to a very specific part of Italy. And on the negative side, there are some people, this is specifically about the Danger track. We had some people who don't like that the Danger track in this one is just a recycle of Message in Haunted Mansion's Danger track. And then there was someone who said every song on this list made me crazy. So, for whatever reason, just doesn't land for them. But I would say overall, since we had that shift with the more negative comments trickling in, starting with game 13, at this point, this is the one that's either this one or Legend of the Crystal Skull is getting the most positive comments. But wait till you see what comes with the next one, and I don't think the feedback on game 19 is going to surprise you at all. But we will look now at the Haunting of Castle Malloy and see that that one's favorite is Fiona with 34.7% of the vote. And someone talked about it has such a haunting beauty that captures the specific castle setting most, so I had to pick that. Someone who, again, likes the location-specific feeling and that it's moody. And someone having to choose between Fiona and Grand, and they just liked Fiona's softer sound a little bit. Someone who likes it's melancholic but beautiful with the sound of Ireland. Someone called it haunting, mysterious, beautiful. And again, there's that word melancholy again. Someone who says I chose Fiona because of how well they capture the melancholy tone and somberness, but also it was a different feel to the other tracks. And then top 5, after Fiona, we have Grand getting 21.8%. And then Carolyn's Draft gets 7.9%. And that's actually one of the pub tracks. So we did have one of those actually finding its way all the way into the top 5. And then Brendan and Past tied with 6.9% of the vote. And people who voted for Grand, you'd already seen with Fiona, there's a haunting beauty to it that people appreciated. And people who voted for Grand, someone actually did say something very similar, called it hauntingly beautiful. And quite a lot of love for the pub music overall. People just saying that music is really superb and great dance material. And there actually was someone who said, basically, if the pub tracks, Irish jigs aren't playing, they actually get really tired of this soundtrack. And then there was just someone who said, like, those pub tracks are great, but you just don't get to hear them enough to really say, like, this embodies Haunting of Castle Malloy, which I thought was a very fair comment. But again, we've kind of been tracking this up and down. Music's really beloved, then it drops off, gets more polarizing and critiqued, and then things are starting to swing back up in a positive direction. And this one, by far, if we're going back to when the kind of shift happened with Game 13, this soundtrack gets so much love. I just had comment after comment of people talking about how much they love this soundtrack. And that does not surprise me in the least, because I just do think musically, again, thinking back to Danger on Deception Island, there's something about that, Celtic, Irish styling. I think it just appeals to a lot of people for good reason. But then also something that was very telling with this game is I had quite a few comments of people saying, not a great game, great soundtrack. So they're making that distinction of maybe they don't love the game, but oh, do they love its soundtrack. And there was some person who even thinks this might be the best soundtrack, and just that it fits the vibe and the setting super well. And I liked this one. Someone said they had to stop listening so they would stop giving themselves more choices. So very telling. And I'm just looking through my comments here. I have so many comments, so we would be here forever if I stopped to read them all to you, of just how much people love the Irish sound of this. I think Kevin Manthe really nailed it. And I did like this comment. This soundtrack has 2 options, joyful jig or haunting melody. Both are amazing, but it was quite difficult to pick. I feel like the cheerful songs are often overpowered by the awesome deep laments, but deserve a chance to shine too. Someone who said, I don't think there's a single track on this album I don't like. So Oh, and then also this one. Love how jolly and upbeat the majority of these tracks are. A lot of them sound like they could belong to DDI, given how similar they sound to Jig. So again, I think it's that specific style of music. Very appealing to people. And then as negative comments, there's someone who they think this is a good soundtrack, but they find it a little bit repetitive. And I can see that, again, when you have all of that Irish styling, it might start to sound repetitive after a while. And then there was someone who thinks the pub music is great. They don't like that you basically have to go out of your way in order to be able to hear it. And they think that Fiona and Nursery sound the same and they get played too often. So a little bit of negativity, but overall, people really loved that one. And then comes Ransom of the Seven Ships, which I realize it's a discontinued game from Her Interactive, but there are lots of people who still stream it and talk about it and listen to the soundtrack, so I did want to make sure this one made it into the voting. So for Ransom of the Seven Ships, our favorite track is Island with 30.8% of the vote. And some said, it's so happy, it makes me want to be on a beach, it's just too fun, it's the most memorable for someone. And I got a comment of, I don't like this game, but I do like this track. And great beach track, so such a great track to listen to while you're sitting on the beach, sipping a cold drink and enjoying the warm weather, cool breeze. And then there was this one. I don't play this one as much, so I really only like the one song. And then top 5. After that, we get Toro with 22.1%, and then Johnny 17.3%. 10.6 don't know the soundtrack. Again, that does not surprise me, this being a discontinued game. I'm sure there's people who just haven't even gotten the chance to play it. And then Monkeys with 5.8%. But again, as you can see, we have a pretty clear top 3. And people who love Toro, someone loved the guitar, someone loved how peaceful it is. And then Johnny, not a surprising comment. There were quite a few comments about Johnny. People saying it sounds like a Pirates of the Caribbean track. And as soon as I saw that comment, I was like, oh, yes, absolutely. Totally could have been put in that movie and would have fit really well. So, good pirate music. And then general comments. Similar to Haunting of Castle Malloy, get quite a few comments of people saying, game is horrible, music is awesome. So I thought that was interesting that we have 2 games in a row that hit that, like, don't like the game, love the music. And I thought this was a fun comment. Just a person took the time to explain how they think, even though Ransom of the Seven Ships and Creature of Kapu Cave are both beach games, their soundtracks hit 2 totally different vibes. And so this person really appreciated that Kapu Caves sounds distinctly Hawaiian, and this one is distinctly Bahamian. And so they just like and see that as an example of music and setting. Again, this is a running theme. People really seize on, like, how well does the music fit the location. So this person really liked that and said, for a game with very little character interaction, the music here plays such an important role, and it works to keep the game upbeat and clipping along. And there were negative comments about this one. Someone who said they liked the tracks each on their own, but they don't like that the tracks don't seem to fit the atmosphere of the game. And they said it's because because a kidnapping happens in Ransom of the Seven Ships, they think that the soundtrack should have somehow gotten more of that like unsettling vibe that the final scene does. So I'm envisioning then I think this person probably, they would like, yes, let's do beach Bahamas sounding tracks, but they need to sound sinister and unsettling because hello, Bess got kidnapped, like where is the intensity? And that is true, like a lot of the Ransom of the Seven Ships music is extremely peppy. And someone who said the soundtrack is the only thing that was done correctly in Ransom of the Seven Ships, but they said they, for all that, they still don't like seek this one out to listen to it, and there's a very good chance that they'll actually skip it if it comes up in shuffle. And their reason being, this is great. Am I still bitter about being openly mocked by monkeys when I lose their games? Yes I am. Does that have something to do with my feelings towards the soundtrack? Probably. So, memory associations with the game, specifically of traumatic monkeys, makes it so that particular person just cannot enjoy this soundtrack. And then there was someone who said that the whole soundtrack sounds like stereotypical tropical elevator music. And that's a comment that does come up here and there. People think some of these sound like a little bit too much like their location, to the point that it's just very stereotypical. And now, warnings at Waverly Academy. What's the favorite for this one? It is Gossip with 26% of the vote. And one person really basically loves everything about this game's soundtrack, but they just put Gossip at the top. Someone who loves how cheery Gossip is. This person says I have to give it to Gossip because it makes me think of the game most, except all of the cello pieces. And then another person says I feel guilty choosing this one over all the cello options. But to them, Gossip somehow exudes snooping and sneaking around, so that's why they voted for it. And then top 5. Or in this case, there are 6 here because we had a tie at the bottom. Very close to Gossip. So again, we're talking a tie, basically for half of the vote. It's between Gossip and Waverly. And then Black Cat with 17.3%. So once again, we have a pretty clear top 3. And then Storm gets 5.8% of the vote. And then Cello 1 and Violin tie with 4.8% of the vote. And this soundtrack, this one was another polarizing one. Again, it just seems to be hit or miss. They tried something with this one and it either really works for people or they can't stand it. Got people saying they love this whole soundtrack. They find it a very great study music and helps them to be very productive, and they'll put this one on in the background when they're working, and it just really helps keep them moving along. And there were a lot of people who love all of the cello pieces and wish that we had more of that in the games. And someone even said about that one, I love that there are 6 different cello tracks. It gives a really realistic feeling of overhearing someone practice in their room, which adds so much to the ambiance. So keep that in mind. People who love the cello, yes, give me more cello. Give us more games that have soundtracks with a solo instrument just doing its thing like that. But for pretty much every comment you can find of someone who loves the cello in this game comes the other side of people who really can't stand it. Comments like, I do like listening to this soundtrack to study, but why is half of this cello music? And someone who said, wow, did I never realize how much of the background of this game is just people playing the cello? And someone who said, they don't really like this soundtrack because most of it's just cello music. And that person specifically said, I love listening to Nancy Drew music because it's so unique, original, and lovely. I don't get that from the cello music in this soundtrack. Yes, I know it ties in with Mel constantly practicing and adds to the overall environment of the dorms, but I wish we had gotten more original music for this game. And when they're not listening to cello music, they do like the original tracks in this game and think those are really well done. And then some other people who don't like the cello, there was one person, they said like they don't like how raw the instrumentals sound. So I think probably they're thinking specifically of like when you hear the cello playing in this game, like you're not just hearing cello, like you're hearing what is very clearly someone practicing the cello. And so it's not the most precise playing at times. And let's see, I'm looking at more of my comments. Like, yes, people just get really tired of the cello. And for that reason, some people actually said, like, this is a bad soundtrack. One of my least favorite soundtracks. And someone said, I hate hearing Mel practice her cello and they call it a soundtrack. Boo. So, again, Her Interactive, it seems like they tried something. The composer, I don't remember off the top of my head who did this game's music. I know it wasn't Kevin Manthe, and I should have double checked who did it. And I don't know if that composer was the one that decided, like, hey, let's use classical cello music and scales for a big chunk of it. But whoever made that decision, it was a gamble, and some people love it and some people hate it. So now we have Trail of the Twister, and the favorite track for that game is Bluegrass with 26.5% of the vote. And people said it's great, so jaunty and country, and reminds me of old Oregon Trail music. That's a fun little nostalgic association. And someone's dancing in their cowgirl boots. This one again, this has already come up with games 19 and 20, another terrible game with a stupidly great soundtrack. And they went with Bluegrass. Here's someone hearing a musical connection to Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? And again, just liking that country jig feel. And then very close to Bluegrass, we get Plains with 23.5% of the vote. And people enjoy that one as they think it's perfect ambient music and has a good whimsy, feels both somber and hopeful, and they think it's good car ride music and just really does help you like look out, yes, plains for miles. So they like that feel that it gives. And then country comes in with 12.7%, and then prairie and sleuth tied with 9.8% of the vote. And this soundtrack, for the most part, again, gets quite a lot of love. And someone called it a killer soundtrack. And there's some people who they listen to this soundtrack quite frequently and they love every track. People who just love the country music vibes of it. People who find it underrated and kind of reminiscent of Secret of Shadow Ranch, which makes sense to me because you are getting some of that like bluegrass country overlap. Although someone did say this one could easily have sounded similar to Shadow Ranch, but it is distinctly its own sound and vibe. It has a very mellow, Midwestern, cheerful feel to it. And someone who said this game was forgettable to me, but re-listening to the soundtrack makes me want to replay it. And someone who doesn't love the game, but they do love the soundtrack. And again, people saying this one is underrated. Again, I think we're seizing on that idea of Trail of Twister tends to be one of the lower ranked games in the fandom. So people are thinking overrated or thinking underrated because when a game is that disliked, that means maybe its soundtrack doesn't get as much love as it should. But then there are some people who they just don't like this game. They don't like anything about it, including its soundtrack. And that actually was the comment. I think like everyone who said something negative, they said like, I don't care about this game or its soundtrack. So again, I think we have that very close association of if you really can't stand the game, you probably maybe don't like its soundtrack either. And now we will take a look at Shadow at the Water's Edge. And Shadow at the Water's Edge comes with Pop getting a third of the vote. And we get another comment from Rue for this one. And she said that Pop is the track I need to play when I need to lock in at work. And here's a fun one. Nothing like taking the train into the city to see Yumi and bopping to this after being traumatized by the ghost at the Ryokan. If you don't sometimes take the train in Saw just to hear the music, you're not playing Saw properly. It's so fun. Someone who calls it a total bop, favorite track, one of their favorite tracks from any game, and then also someone saying it reminds me of cool girl shopping in the early 2000s on TV. So that's not surprising to me at all that this one is the winner. And then after that comes the other like techno, like J-pop bop in this game, Modern with 19%. But then very close to that one, we get Kasumi with 18.1%. And then Ryokan and Tradition. That top 5 result really doesn't surprise me. Tradition and Ryokan are both the more peaceful Japanese, like that traditional Japanese sounding music, and they actually like are music as opposed to some of the other ones just are really, as you know, really intensely like unsettling, like ambiance kind of music that really just, it definitely sets me on edge, and I know it sets a lot of other people on edge. So this result does not surprise me that we're kind of seizing on all of the tracks in this game that have some sort of melody you can latch onto. Although I think it's cool that Kasumi ends up in the third spot, because there's a lot about that track that makes it very like disturbing to listen to because of the distortion effects on it. But I love that people really like it. Some people called that one spooky and sad. Someone said it's the theme for the game, haunting and beautiful and mysterious with Japanese flair, and others who like its eeriness. So, again, just my theory. If I had to guess, I think maybe the reason why Kasumi ends up being the spooky track that makes it into the top 5 when none of the others do is probably because it does actually have a melody. But just the longer the track goes on, it starts to get more and more distorted. But it does, at least it like gives you some kind of like music to seize onto. And then general comments about this one. Someone said that this one has a great balance of creepy and eerie music that makes me want to hide with lighthearted modern music that makes me want to dance. And there's people like even the spooky suspenseful music. They really like that. Lots of comments talking about like, yeah, the creepy tracks in this one, they really are creepy and they put people on edge. And someone said a truly remarkable score for a truly memorable and remarkable game where setting and atmosphere are everything. The soundtrack nails every element of the game. Creepy, sad, beautiful, traditional, and exciting. This score is filled with brilliant sound design and deliberate choices to ramp up the spooky factor. And it sounds like electronic interference and energy are in the tracks themselves. Even Kasumi sounds traditional on the surface, but is actually dark and a little off and twisted. Modern and Pop are great upbeat tracks that really sound like new young Japan. And this person chose Ryokan as their favorite. They like its beauty and use of traditional Japanese instruments. So I just thought that was a very insightful comment. Again, just kind of hitting on the overarching things that are happening with this soundtrack. Other people, again, they like that blend of, we got modern and traditional Japanese music blending together in this game. And someone who said this soundtrack is objectively good, but it's one of the ones I enjoy the least simply because most of the tracks are so unnerving. And this person spends a lot of time in the city so they can hear the J-pop music that gives relief from the tension you get when you're at the Ryokan. And I know, like, in the fandom that's a pretty common sentiment about this soundtrack. So it does seem like balance is very key to this soundtrack and why it works so well. Again, like balance, modern music, traditional music, and also balance in super creepy music, but we can also, when we need to, go to the city and hear stuff that feels very upbeat. And so there really was not any negative feedback. I think there was maybe one negative comment about this soundtrack, but people have a lot of respect for this one. And then next comes The Captive Curse. So for The Captive Curse, we have girls with 46.6% of the vote. So almost 50%, getting there. So a very, very well-beloved one. And someone said I play piano and violin, so this is one of my faves to play. And someone who actually considers this to be their favorite Nancy Drew track of all time. People talking about the lovely melody, beautiful, heart-wrenching, sweet and sad with great strings and piano. And someone feels like this one goes back to the feel of some of the earlier soundtracks. And then this person's saying they love how this one tells a story. So, steep drop off after Girls. We end up with Legend at 20.4%. And then Waltz gets 10.7%. Then Creature and Mystery finishing out the top 5. And general comments about this one. I'm looking at my notes, and I think for the most part, there's quite a lot of love for The Captive Curse. Someone says it's got a lot of emotion and richness. The strings make the notes come alive. Quite a few comments, people talking about the tension and intensity of this soundtrack stands out, and they really enjoy that. And someone said that all the tracks just pull the player further into the game. There's some who, again, think this one ties into its location really well. And someone who said that it perfectly captures the medieval castle setting with the urgency and creepiness of a monster on the loose. Great use of choir vocals throughout the soundtrack. The score sounds distinctly Bavarian, which is an impressive feat. And, but there are also some who don't think this is a particularly great soundtrack. Someone who did say it has a distinct sound, but it just doesn't wow them. And there was actually someone who they find this one kind of confusing and they like it, but for whatever reason it sounds too much apparently like other game soundtracks, and so that was a criticism of it. And now let's look at Alibi in Ashes, which, as I'm sure you're well aware, is the last Kevin Manthe soundtrack, and our most popular track from that game is Home with 36.9% of the vote. And I thought the comments about this one were quite interesting, because what we see here is as much or more comments about location as music. Because we have someone who voted for this one, they said they loved Nancy's room. And again, someone talking about love being in Nancy's home and getting to see that, and being in River Heights. And this person saying my favorite part of this game is exploring Nancy's house. And this song really fits the peaceful feeling of her house. And people find this one peaceful and comforting. It's cozy, reminds me of happy times with friends and family. And then this one, I love how home makes the player feel like you're coming home after being away for a long time. So I just found it interesting that this one, at least for some people, it almost seems to be more about where you hear the music as it is about the music itself. And just being so excited to be in Nancy Drew's house and seeing not just her desk in an opening game sequence, but seeing her entire room. People really like that, and we know that this track very often plays in the Drew family's home, so it just has that strong location connection. And then after that, people like Clues, that got 19.4%, and then Ashes gets 15.5% of the vote, and then Town and Spy finishing it out. And comments about this one, someone pointed out that usually they hear a lot of negativity about this soundtrack, but they think it's quite well done. Great soundtrack to listen to when you're looking for some lighthearted ND vibes that make you feel like you're sitting at Nancy's desk and planning your next case. And someone who said that of this game, they think the mystery relies heavily on the detective work gameplay in place of traditional puzzles. And they think the music does a really good job complementing that with good, mysterious, sleuthy tracks. And someone did say about this one, a lot of the tracks sound the same. It's just kind of whimsical. So this one seems to be more of a, like, I don't love it, I don't hate it. Someone said not bad, but it's not terribly exciting. And others who say, like, it's good, but it's not anything particularly special. But it does add something to the game. Another person who says they enjoy the music when they're playing the game, but other than that, they kind of have a hard time remembering it. And there was a similar comment just saying, like, it's not a memorable soundtrack, you could stick it into any game. Which, again, I've been pointing out the fact that a lot of these soundtracks will get very passionate comments about, like, oh, it fits the location so well, it puts me right there. So something about this one, I don't know, maybe just small town America doesn't have a distinctive enough sound, and so people tend to be listening for, like, I want to be put in the location. This one doesn't do it. Like, there's not anything about it that says, like, oh yeah, I'm in River Heights. So just thought that was interesting. So just kind of a middle of the road soundtrack. And then at this point we move to a new era, because this is when Thomas Regin comes in. So his first is Tomb of the Lost Queen, and the favorite track for that one is Dance with 24.5% of the vote. And comments about the appropriateness of the name. I'm shaking my hips. Someone who thinks it's great, peaceful, exploring Egypt. Someone who likes the tension of it. Percussion, syncopation, and then a fun one, I had to pull this one out, gives me Brendan Fraser's The Mummy vibes in a very cool way. I love The Mummy, so love that comment so much. So I thought it was interesting with this one, there's kind of not really one specific thing about it that makes it people's favorite. There's kind of a diversity of what people enjoy about it. And then top 5. We get Ancient after that, and Desert, both tied at 14.2%, and then very close behind that is Hymn. And then some people, same as Hymn, don't know the soundtrack. And then Camp comes in with 11.3% of the vote. And overall, this one, and again, I know Tomb of the Lost Queen tends not to be a popular game in the fandom. That there was quite a bit of praise for this soundtrack. People who said like it's just overall great. The whole thing's a banger. Again, similar with some of the earlier games. Someone who says like great soundtrack, even though the game is not great. And someone who really loves it just because they personally really have a soft spot for ancient Egypt, so they felt like this game captured that very well. And the woodwind instruments in particular really do a good job with the setting. And again, another amazing, perfect example of a form-fitting soundtrack. I truly feel like I am in Egypt, listening to locals create beautiful and traditional music. And they also felt like each song tells an individual story. But this person did also just add a comment saying that their partner doesn't really like the soundtracks and thought like it sounds like too Egyptian in a stereotypical kind of way. And then we did get some people just saying like Egyptian music, it's not my vibe, so I don't really like this soundtrack. And then there were a couple people who said just none of the tracks really stand out. So this one again, kinda, some people love it, some people don't really care for it. But the next one, Deadly Device, before we talk about the soundtrack as a whole, we'll take a look at its favorite, which is Mystery, with 27.6% of the vote. And someone said this game has a wicked soundtrack. The opening is always amazing. I love how intense this track is. It makes you really feel a time crunch. Someone who likes that it's so funky and groovy while also being mysterious. Solemn vibe, but still upbeat and calming. And then this was a fun one. It reminds me of the 80s, sort of. So I did like, especially these couple of comments, kind of showing that this track has almost like two personalities going on. That it somehow manages to hit this more like groovy, upbeat side while also being kind of solemn and mysterious. And then our top 5 for this one, after that comes Research with 16.2%, Science, then Loss, and Discovery. And you can see like those tracks, there's kind of close voting, so we have quite a few pretty well loved ones from this game. And overall, looking again, I have tons of praise for this one. People really like the Deadly Devices soundtrack. Someone who likes the diversity in it, but it also maintains the atmosphere. Again, I'm seeing more than one comment, people who find this one very atmospheric. Someone who thinks it's underrated. Again, this is association of like, you have people who don't really love the game. So this person thinks soundtrack's underrated as a result and should get more love. And someone called it electric, cheeky, sinister, and fun. Someone said re-listening to these tracks made me realize how great the music was. I guess I didn't really pay attention while playing the first few times, but just the first 3 songs got me hooked. They'd make great study/background music, which I guess makes sense since it's a science-y game. And I had someone who they were listening and they thought, oh, I'm going to vote for this one. Then in the next one would come on, oh wait, no, I'm going to vote for that one. And they just had a really hard time picking. And again, someone said, I forgot how good this soundtrack is. So again, I think this maybe because this game isn't as popular, probably doesn't get played as much. It was almost like a pleasant surprise to some people. And it actually did. Yes, I'm seeing someone who said, I completely forgot about this game and soundtrack. And they found it like pretty much impossible to choose a favorite. And again, someone who says, I always forget how absolutely melancholy this soundtrack is. So it's almost like for a lot of people, Deadly Device is just kind of flying under the radar because the game is not being played as much if people are not into the science elements of it, and so they forget that the soundtrack exists, and then they listened for this survey and they're like, whoa, this is amazing. So that was kind of the gist of this one. Some people don't like this soundtrack, but really for the most part got lots and lots and lots of love, and people who, as I said, were like pleasantly surprised by all the tracks. They kind of had just forgotten about this one. Goes to Thornton Hall. Let's look at that one's favorite. This result did not surprise me in the least. Large majority of the vote. Past gets 61.5% of the vote. And I'm tempted to say Past may have gotten the most thoughtful comments. People had some really beautiful things to say. Well, this one actually I'm thinking of later. But this one channels a really emotional response in a lot of people. Seems to have tapped into something just very special. As you can see with this top comment, someone says, I don't think music has ever managed to bring me to tears, except this track. Full body goosebumps literally every time I listen to it. And then someone saying, in contrast to all the other tracks, which just sound over the top eerie, this one tells a story. I like scores with instruments and a story, not just sounds. Someone finds this one haunting and chilling, but in a lovely way. Another person picking it as their favorite because it doesn't give me nightmares. And then I thought this was a really beautifully expressed comment. Someone saying that Past is so beautiful, melancholic, and really yearning for the past. It really fits the Thornton mansion with how the house has seen so much loss. And maybe the building itself wants to go back to a happy time. I really liked that connection between the music and the mansion itself. And oh yes, I see. Yes, right. This one has 2 slides worth of comments. That's how much people had to say about this one. Again, another comment about saying this one legitimately like makes someone want to cry. Person says, I remember this track hitting me like a brick when I first heard it. Still the only ND piece out of all 34 games to literally make me feel unbearably sad. And someone who thinks maybe this might be their favorite from any of the soundtracks. Someone who likes the calm piano. And then another person who says they like how this one makes the player think of happier times as they reflect back on the past, even if the tone of the track has its sad and regretful moments. And again, I just thought I was really intrigued and honestly not surprised that somehow that one just really created a very emotional connection for a lot of people. So after that comes Ladybug Ladybug, or also known as Dear Sweet Charlotte. So that's the one with vocals, 11.5%. Then Dark, and Ghost, and then 5.8% who don't know the soundtrack. So comments about this one, just a couple of negative ones. Some people think that a lot of the soundtrack, like, it all sounds the same. And that was this person in particular, like, part of the reason why they like Past is because it's the one that doesn't sound like all the rest. And some people, again, they just don't like this one. Someone said it's more sounds than music to me. And that's definitely come up in discussions about this soundtrack before, that, like, is it music or is it more ambiance? And so some people really don't like that one. But I think for the most part, this one got a lot of positive comments. Someone said, hurts so bad, I love it. This is one person's favorite soundtrack, along with Sea of Darkness. And they really like how atmospheric it is, and they think it's the most atmospheric soundtrack of all the games. Someone saying Some of these were so scary to listen to. Marvelous job with ambiance and gloomy tone. Again, another comment on the ambiance. The music does little more than create ambiance, but it works. And again, scary, fits the family history really well. Very dark. And so for the most part, people seem to appreciate that feel. They like the ambiance that's created. They don't really mind that it's more like ambient sounds in a lot of ways than actual music. So again, this one just seems to be like hit or missed. That ambiance effect, some people really love it and some people just don't care for it. Then comes Silent Spy. I think you could probably also very easily guess what won out for Silent Spy. This is going to surprise no one that the most popular track is Kate with 49.5% of the vote. So if we round up, basically we're saying half of the vote went to Kate. And before I move on to the comments about Kate, I do just want to make a quick little remark. I apologize that for a large chunk of while this survey was open to people, I didn't have the track Kate and Nancy in the list for voting. So I do know that like a couple people voted for Kate when what they really wanted to do was vote for Kate and Nancy. Quite frankly, it doesn't significantly affect the voting in any way, but I did just want to point that out. And that's on me for not including Kate and Nancy in the voting options until towards the end of the survey. So about Kate, people say the emotion and longing is just beautiful. Someone who says it's one of the best Nancy Drew tracks because of its beauty and the connection you get with Kate Drew. And others who love the significance in the game itself. Again, there's that word significant. Most significant song in the Nancy Drew world. Someone who says the piano on Kate has my heart. So full of depth and storytelling without any words needed. And then someone saying, even though I don't remember what happens in this game, aside from it being about Nancy's mom, somehow listening to Kate still makes me misty-eyed just hearing it. Definitely the winner on this soundtrack. And here's our top 5. We have Memories coming in next with 17.5%, and then Expectations and Tradition were tied. And then Forward, a little bit behind that with 6.8%. So, Silent Spy. Quite a bit of praise overall for this one. Some who can't decide their favorite from this game because they love them all. This person, for example, one said, Spy my beloved. I love this soundtrack so much. Honorable mentions is all the tracks. Makes me cry and I feel like I'm in a spy thriller at the same time. Seems like there's someone who really likes all the use of piano in this one, and comments about great musical story tie-in, and then the rest of the score gives off great spy energy. So again, kind of seeing like this soundtrack seems to hit kind of two personalities. You have some very emotional tracks such as Memories and Kate, and then when we're not getting those really emotional ones, we get these very like spy sounding ones. And so there are quite a lot of people who like the soundtrack kind of hitting those two elements. And actually someone did say, I think this is the reason why probably. I personally really like the Spy-esque tracks that are included in this game, and I think it adds a bit of fun to a game that can feel emotionally heavy at times. So good job to Thomas Regin for giving us, again, that offset. It makes me think of Shadow at the Water's Edge, where you have the very spooky tracks balanced by the J-pop techno tracks in the city. Because yes, I do think if everything in Silent Spy were just, oh, super emotional, Kate, Drew, Nancy, and her mom, like, yeah, it honestly might be too much for some people. Some negative comments about this one. A person who just finds this soundtrack boring, and then there was another person who said other than Kate, all the other tracks just bring back unpleasant memories of having to navigate the cathedral archives and do dead drops. And so bad memory associations, so they don't really care for this one. Then comes the Shattered Medallion, and our top track for Shattered Medallion is Tranquility with 35.8% of the vote. And someone calls it a lovely tune, and I thought this was fun because I love Narnia. The beginning of it also reminds me of the soundtrack to the Chronicles of Narnia, which is such a bonus, and I thought about it. Yep, I can totally hear that similarity. Pretty track for a meh game. And someone saying Tranquility lives up to its name. It's nice, calm, and happy. Very soft with the flute being the focal point. And then this comment, I thought I wanted to just put this in here. I think this person did actually vote for Tranquility, but they also said they wish it didn't exist. And they said it's a track they remember from another game. They didn't say which game, and I'm not sure if they mean another Nancy Drew game or if they mean just some other non-Nancy Drew game. Interesting comment. If that person is watching this video and you care to leave a comment explaining more, feel free. But I wanted to get that included. And then after Tranquility, we have Exploration with 21.7%, and then a decent chunk, 14.2%, picked that they don't know this soundtrack. And then Majestic and Puzzle finishing it out. And some comments I pulled out on Exploration as the number 2 track. Fittingly named, apparently, because some said it feels like I'm walking around a destination location. It's peaceful while still maintaining a mystery. And someone who said this one feels the most like a location. You're exploring a new landscape, searching for hidden clues before the other team does. And then general comments about Shattered Medallion. Again, we have Rue chiming in, and she said that this whole soundtrack is my second favorite game soundtrack ever. It is so good. And someone who says this one's a lot of fun, and they like listening to it when they need some variety from the soundtracks that they usually would listen to on repeat. And again, some people similar to some earlier games, people saying music and environment was the only good thing about the game. And again, don't love Shattered Medallion, but I think its soundtrack is one of its strongest features. And then someone who said, again, they think this one is underappreciated, maybe because the game is a bit mediocre. So once again, we have that running theme. Sometimes with some of these, you'll find people really like the soundtrack despite not liking the game, and they might think it's underrated as a result. But again, this one got quite a few negative comments from someone who just, in choosing their favorite, they weren't actually choosing their favorite, they were just choosing the one they don't mind the most. And a couple comments, very telling to me. Someone said, I remember hating this game so much. That might be why it's hard for me to pick a track I actually like. And someone said, boo! Shattered Medallion, boo! In all seriousness, I think this game could have been redeemed ever so slightly if the soundtrack wasn't also complete garbage. So there's some passionate dislike for this one. In some cases at least, because it cannot be divorced from the game that it's for, and so you can't stand the game, also can't stand the soundtrack. But then there were also some comments just like, I don't really have an opinion about this one, I don't find it that memorable. So This one kind of ends up like some people like it, some people don't. Depends on taste and I think maybe how you feel about this game. Now let's move on to Labyrinth of Lies. Discovery. 20.6% of the vote for Discovery. So again, as you can see, that's not a super high percentage. But we'll see what people had to say. Not a whole lot about this one. Someone who loves the choice of instruments. Another who finds it peaceful. And then a musical similarity. Discovery reminds me a lot of Rain's Rhapsody from the Owl House. I actually looked it up to make sure it wasn't the same track. And then this one is interesting. As you can see, we get quite a big split in the voting. It's very close to Discovery. We get Longing with 18.6%. And a little bit after that, Festive. Then 14.7% who don't know the soundtrack. So again, you're seeing with some of these later games that option's coming up a lot. And then Resigned comes in next, Solitude, and Culture. So this graphic like visually reminded me a lot of Secret of Shadow Ranches, where you just have that wide variety of quite a few different favorites for this one. However, just my personal opinion, I'm not convinced that that then says like, wow, Labyrinth of Lies like is an all-around great soundtrack in the same way Secret of Shadow Ranch is. Because I don't really hear people talk about this soundtrack a whole lot, so I'm just not convinced it's all that popular. So that makes me think more maybe this is just a matter of, well, it just so happens like it has a lot of solid tracks, maybe not any clear standouts, but I just don't get the sense that people are as attached to this soundtrack as they are Secret of Shadow Ranch. So despite the graphs looking similar, I don't think the same amount of love is happening for all of the music. But again, I just tried to pull out, because of how split the voting was, I tried to pull out some comments about some of the other ones. So Longing, some people think lives up to its name, like it actually does create a sense of longing and it's very peaceful and fits Grease really well. Some people who like Festive, they love how upbeat it is, and again they like the Greek vibe of it. And I thought this was also a fun comment about Culture. I didn't put it on the previous slide because this person didn't actually vote for Culture as their favorite, but someone did just say about Culture that it sounds like it can be Exotics from Secret of Scarlet Hand's cousin. So that's fun. And Resigned. Again, polarizing track. I had back-to-back comments of one person saying, like, why do they have a man singing on this track? That makes no sense to me. And then right after that came a comment of someone saying, I love the vocals in Resigned. So once again, it's just one of those like hit or miss, depending on who you ask. And then for Solitude, oh, and I misspoke earlier, like Culture wasn't, the person who said Culture is Exotic's cousin. Culture was not the favorite track. That's actually here finishing out at the bottom. But that was what someone said about Culture. And then Solitude, someone liked the flute in that one. General comments about this one. I didn't see any negative comments about this one, but I didn't get a ton of positive ones about it. So again, I think it's just one of those like, sure, people like it, but it doesn't stand out for them. This might, again, have something to do with the game itself, because again, Labyrinth of Lies is not what I would consider one of the most popular games in the fandom. But people who enjoy it, they think the music fits well with the ancient Greek aesthetic. Someone who says this one's iconic, you hear the music and you immediately associate it with the game. And someone who's obsessed with the music, even though they don't like the game. But there was someone who just, other than Discovery, they just don't find this soundtrack particularly memorable. So that one, just kind of So we've got some now. We're back to this pattern of soundtracks not necessarily being hated, but they're not wowing people. But then, you really need me to tell you, I feel like, again, we kind of, all of us who have played this game, we kind of already know this intuitively. Sea of Darkness. Oh my goodness, does the tone shift for Sea of Darkness. Before we talk about the soundtrack overall, we do need to look at the favorite. So the favorite track for Sea of Darkness is The Word I Couldn't Keep, with 32.4% of the vote. I think this is another one where I had to put people's comments on 2 slides because they had so much to say about this one. So some people saying, I cried listening, such a beautiful sound and deep story. It's a favorite song for someone, and consistent comment here. We wish Nancy Drew games had songs with lyrics. Like, wow, that's incredible. We get vocals, and there are some earlier tracks, Curse of Blackmore Manor, for example, and Ghost of Thorn Hall, that do have songs with lyrics, but they're short. You don't hear them that much in the game. But this one, I remember like the marketing for this, and also the fact that you get to listen to the entire thing in the credits, and the song is part of a puzzle in the game. Like, it does not surprise me that people kind of talk about this one almost as if it's the first time that we got a track that had words. So people really love that it has lyrics. Someone says, no question, best ND track of all time. And I liked this comment at the bottom. If I heard this song from a different franchise, show, etc., I'd be obsessed. And knowing it's an original song made for the ND series makes it that much more beautiful and meaningful. I love it to pieces. And here's some more. I love them all because of the magical, melancholic, and piratey songs, but this is the second game to have someone sing, which also makes it stand out. And, ooh, okay, music as storytelling. Thoughtful. It's beautiful and also reflects Nancy's situation with Ned. I think this is the first time I've ever heard someone talk about this song as somehow tying into Nancy and Ned's relationship. Interesting thought, thinking about those lyrics. So, whoever you are, commenter, you're insightful. And this one's called Gorgeous, Heart-Wrenching, Perfect. And again, just another comment, like, we don't usually get songs that actually have singing. So that's part of, I think, what helps The Word I Couldn't Keep stand out, because it really is a full-bodied, like, song with Elizabeth singing and has a big build. So I'm really not surprised that this one got these kind of comments. And then let's take a look. Second place is Shanty with 25.7% of the vote. And I think it's interesting, if you stop and think about it, The Word I Couldn't Keep and Shanty are kind of, in a sense, 2 different versions of the same music. You have The Word I Couldn't Keep as the vocal version, and then Shanty as the instrumental. And they're not styled exactly the same, but it is like, it's the same melody. It is The Word I Couldn't Keep melody. So we're looking at basically almost 60% of the vote going between 2 different versions of the same music. Then comes All Hands. And then once again, as we're seeing with some of these later games, we get a Don't Know the Soundtrack choice. And then Rebuilding and Festival. And this soundtrack, holy moly, and I see a pattern here. Musical styles. Danger on Deception Island, Haunting of Castle Malloy, Sea of Darkness. When I'm talking about like people leaving comments for me where you can tell they're just praise and love is just spewing forth out of them, it comes not just for those 3 soundtracks, but it came for all 3 of those soundtracks. And I think that's very interesting that stylistically they all have the same thing in common of kind of in some way having some sort of like Celtic or Irish or sea shanty kind of vibe. Like, no, I'm not saying that all 3 of them are exactly the same kind of music. There are little nuances to each one, but there's a sense in which overarching, stylistically very similar. And there's something about that style of music that just really appeals to people. And I'm looking at my notes again, and I noted this soundtrack in particular. Effusive praise. Oh my word, you all love this soundtrack, and there was not a single negative comment about this one. Just overload of positive comments. Nothing bad to say about it. Tons and tons and tons and tons of comments about how do I choose? Don't ask me to choose. Like, I can't. I choose them all. Like, I'm looking here and I just see there's so much all caps. People just yelling at me. Like, I can't pick. Don't make me pick. And they'll say, like, my favorite is all of them. So, very popular soundtrack. We went out in the point and click era, the old style of Nancy Drew games. Like, we went out on a high note with this soundtrack for how loved it is. Again, just people who can't pick. They don't skip anything. They love it all. I think it all ties together really well. And people talking about how emotional this one is. It has a melancholy feeling to it. And just truly amazing music. Like, that was definitely the overall sense. Like, love all of it. Just overall masterpiece. Fabulous. Yes, we love it. So, very popular. Very popular. If I had done a soundtrack ranking video, I'd be very curious to see where like this one and perhaps Danger on Deception Island and Haunting of Castle Malloy land, because of just how much good things people have to say about those ones. So now moving on, finally, we got 2 more games, and they are the Ryan Ricks era now, and the modern Unity engine era of Nancy Drew. And as a result, we're gonna see the same thing happen with both of these soundtracks when we get to the graph. Won't surprise you. But first of all, let's talk about Midnight in Salem's favorite track, which is the main theme, getting 17% of the vote, so not particularly popular. And also, the comments about this one, very telling to me. I got really only 2 comments about main theme, and neither of them show any particularly great love for the track. This person's saying, honestly, I don't know. I think the first half is great, but then it gets to a beat. And someone saying, this is the only one I bothered to listen to regularly, so by default, it's gotta be that one. So, again, despite this one coming out on top, not a whole lot of love for it. Does that really surprise anyone? I doubt it. Then let's look at our chart. So, now I did say the main theme comes out with 17% of the vote. Technically, the winningest response was 25% of you saying you don't know the soundtrack. Again, doesn't surprise me. I know that there are quite a few people that have not played Midnight in Salem, either just because for whatever reason they don't want to, or they literally cannot get it to run on their computer, so they haven't been able to play it. So I'm not surprised that that's the most popular response. So then after main theme, we get feelings. And people who voted for feelings, like some people said they like the calming and relaxing piano and its melody. And then we have Aftermath Party and Town Square tied at 8%. And then Puzzling gets 7% of the vote. General comments. Ooh, okay. Lots to say about this one. So, there are actually quite a few people who had good things to say about Midnight in Salem. For example, one person who really likes what they call them the vaporwave-esque tracks, and they're talking about the ones like the one that you hear like when you go into Lauren's shop. They really like, and someone who said they really like the music, even though it doesn't do anything more than give ambiance. They think that works, and someone who really loves this soundtrack. They really like listening to it when they're working or when they're reading, especially in the fall. And someone who said, yeah, it's not as charming as previous soundtracks, but I don't find it that distracting or annoying, unlike some other tracks in other games. And some people just, yeah, they don't mind this one. And they do seem to think that maybe the ambiance sound of it kind of helps you just like lock in and do what you need to do. However, quite a lot of criticism about this one. People who just can't connect to it. Quite a lot of complaints, like it all sounds the same. This might be the worst one. Someone who said the whole soundtrack sounds like it came off of royalty-free websites. And someone, again, sounds the same and doesn't seem to hold the same level of commitment as the music in the previous games. People saying it's missing character and drama that we feel in the other soundtracks. A lot of the songs seem generic and almost give off elevator music vibes. This person misses kind of that sense of having like a full orchestra that you kind of got from some of the other games. Someone thinks this soundtrack has no depth to it. And another person who just thinks like as you play the game, the music starts to become just completely unbearable just because of how repetitive and overstimulating the music is. So that's kind of where it all lands. And I remember like these are criticisms again I've seen even independent of doing this survey. People really struggle with the looping in Midnight in Salem because that was a change just even in how the music works, where you go into an environment and a track starts on loop and you're just gonna keep hearing it. And the Midnight in Salem tracks there's a lot of them, but they all tend to be, I think, on the shorter side. And then in addition to being short, like within their shortness, they tend to be pretty musically repetitive. So it doesn't surprise me that really starts to grate on people. And then also I think the complaint about lacks musical depth is telling, and then also that it sounds generic. Because again, as I've kept saying to you this whole video, people really like the soundtracks that put you in the game. Like I am in this location. I know exactly where I am and what I am doing and where I am doing it. And there seems to just be this sense that Midnight in Salem doesn't make people feel like they are in Salem. It just sounds like generic music. So thinking back to earlier games, if that's what people are used to, it doesn't surprise me that then there would be a lot of criticism of this one for losing that sense of location. And then finally, we are to our last game, Mystery of the Seven Keys and Castle Knight. At 19.4% of the vote is the most popular for that one. And let's see what people had to say about this one. Again, not a super lot of comments about this one, and what I would call like high praise for it if you were choosing it as your favorite. So like, for example, you have this one person, honestly, like the reason why they chose it is not because they actually liked it better, but because the other track had a association that they didn't want. And then just someone saying it's the prettiest, and then this last comment saying the way the notes sound is just wonderful to me, even if it might sound more generic. So again, that's two Ryan Ricks soundtracks so far. The favorite track, it's not a strong favorite. There's not anything about it that makes people think like, wow, this one is just great. And then, unsurprising, 33% of respondents actually said that they don't know this soundtrack. That does not surprise me in the least. I had this survey available for the entire month of July and a little bit of August. So at that point, Mystery of the Seven Keys had only been out for a couple months, and for at least part of when this survey was out, I know the game had not been released on Steam yet, so there were people who hadn't played it because they were waiting for the Steam release, and then there were other people who were waiting for the physical copy. So just quite a lot of people who, at the time of this survey, hadn't even got to play the game yet. So that response does not surprise me. But then looking past Castle Night, Cafe Light is the next most popular track, and then Mellow Cafe down falls in the middle, and that's actually an unused track. It was put in the Holiday Ambiance video on Her's YouTube channel, but then, as far as I know, it's not actually in the game anywhere. So we have once again another unused track winning, and then Castle Day and Cathedral rounding it out. And Mystery of the Seven Keys, this soundtrack, again, kind of varied responses. There are some people who really love this soundtrack. Someone who actually went into it with low expectations, and they ended up being blown away by its sound. And they said, it's been in my head rent-free since launch day, and I'm not mad about it. And they think it's glowy, bright, mysterious, whimsical. And someone who thinks like this soundtrack is kind of putting us back on track to Nancy Drew music. Another who thinks like it's good, but again doesn't have the character and charm of the other games. But they think like, okay, we're stepping in the right direction, and there are some things that fit the environment. And someone who says like, yeah, I don't hate it. So I would say we're getting more positive than Midnight in Salem, and people having maybe this cautious sense of optimism that after a very rough shift from Sea of Darkness. So again, think about this shift. Sea of Darkness, you all love it. You have no bad things to say about Sea of Darkness. The next time we get a Nancy Drew game, you have lots of bad things to say about Midnight in Salem's music. That it's repetitive, it's generic, it's got no depth to it. And then another little shift with Mystery of the Seven Keys of some people think like, hey, maybe we're on the right track. Again, but only some people think we might be on the right track. Because again, still, with Mystery of the Seven Keys, there's quite a lot of people who are very critical of this soundtrack, and they don't like the repetition. Someone who said they had to mute the music several times while playing because of how repetitive it was. And yes, I'm looking through my notes, just lots of complaints about the repetition and wishing either that the tracks were longer or that they didn't keep looping when you're in a certain environment. I thought this is a very insightful comment. This soundtrack suffers from the same phenomenon as Mid, where the tracks aren't necessarily bad, but the way they're utilized in-game makes me hate them. It wasn't nearly as bad in Key as it was in Mid, but the tracks are still repetitive and overstimulating. They are much more enjoyable out of context than Mid's soundtrack, though. So that actually was, I think, a comment that came up more than once, like people saying it's not really the music itself that's the problem for me, it's how the music is used in the game. It just loops too much. So, food for thought. If Game 35 steps away from the looping, but Ryan Ricks is still writing the music, would we get more positive feedback? However, we do still have people like, they think kind of the music all sounds the same, everything blends together, nothing sticks out, has no depth. Again, that was a Midnight in Salem complaint. No complexity. It's underwhelming. And others just saying like, this soundtrack, it just doesn't even compare to soundtracks from some of the earlier games. So still a lot of negativity about Mystery of the Seven Keys. So as it stands with Nancy Drew soundtracks, we're not in a particularly great place. People not really enjoying the music as much, and they're certainly not enjoying the way that it is used in the game. And what does the future hold? I don't know. But I certainly think it was interesting going through these survey results and just seeing not only like each specific soundtrack, which tracks stand out, what do people love about it, what do people not love, but even I just feel like if you kind of step back and look at the big picture of this video and kind of how people's attitudes on the soundtracks have developed over time. Just very interesting to think about how the music has developed and is developing in the series, and has me curious to see what the future will hold. And this actually, like, this kind of big picture overview of like what is going on with the music in the Nancy Drew games. I don't want to say too much because I don't want to get people's hopes up, but I'm actually really hoping to do some more deep diving on this, so keep an eye out. Hopefully down the road there will be some videos kind of exploring in more depth what is happening with the music, what do we enjoy about it, what works, what doesn't work, and just how the different composers that have composed for the series, like, how did they develop as they did more games, and how are they different from each other, that kind of thing. So, no promises that right now that any deep dives from me are coming, but I definitely have aspirations to do them. So, if you made it all the way to the end of this video, I congratulate you for sticking with me, because this was a lot to cover, and I just want to thank everyone who took the time to participate. 34 games is a lot, and each game having multiple tracks, that's a lot to listen to and think about and take the time to comment on. So I thank all of you so much if you participated, and if you watched this video, I thank you for being willing to tune in and stick it out and just see how people in the fandom feel about the music. And I really enjoyed this project and gathering all the data and making observations about it. And I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments about it. You know that I threw some theories out there in terms of why people have certain opinions, negative or positive, about things. If you have a different theory, I would love to hear it. If you have musical insight or whatever else that you can share, I would love to hear it. So definitely feel free to leave me a comment and say whatever you would like about the soundtracks, because I am always happy to hear it. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you around sometime for the next video. Bye everyone!